today. Today's hearing is entitled 2022 Review of the Farm Bill Broadband. After brief opening statements, members will receive testimony from our witnesses today, and then the hearing will be open for questions. I'll start with my opening statement. I want to once again say good morning to everyone. Thank you for joining us. Today we're here to discuss the collaborative efforts, and that is the key word, collaborative, because we have so many of our federal and state agencies and operations that must work together and make this happen. And we will be having collaborative opportunities connected with the USDA, the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, NTIA, the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC. All of these organizations have got to work together to make sure the money that we are allocating for broadband is distributed properly and working effectively. And they each will have critical roles for especially the impact on rural development. But
apparently there's no audio. You're good? She says we're good.
Oh, well, let me start over. Yeah, man, technology when it works.
It was a good speech, so I'm looking forward to hearing it twice.
Oh, man, I got to give it again. Okay, are we ready now, team?
Yep.
Okay. Sorry about that. I think we have our technology working. The committee, of course, now is in order. And I want to welcome and thank everyone for joining us today at our hearing, which is entitled A 2022 Review of the Farm Bill Broadband. After brief opening remarks, members will receive testimony from our witnesses today, and then the hearing will be open for questions. So today we're here to discuss the collaborative efforts, and I want to emphasize that word because we will not be successful if all of our combined federal agencies, our state agencies, are all working together to make sure that the $65 billion that we have appropriated is sufficiently and effectively distributed and in working. And for that effort to be successful, USDA must be able to work with the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, NTIA, and the Federal Communications Commission, FCC, in awarding this $65 million in broadband funding, and examine the role that these agencies play in achieving our goal of 100% full nationwide connectivity for our rural communities. And rural broadband is so critical for our rural areas. It not only in terms of the distribution of the funding, but the establishment finally of rural broadband will be a huge economic benefit to our rural communities. The COVID-19 pandemic highlighted the necessity of reliable broadband as workplaces and businesses migrated online, and healthcare facilities and schools have transitioned to telehealth and distant learning. In response, Congress made substantial investments in broadband funding to existing and newly established federal broadband programs dispersed across multiple federal entities. That's why I say the key word is collaborative, working together. This is the key for success to finally bring rural broadband to our rural communities. And of those investments, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act made the largest federal broadband investment in our nation's history, totaling $65 billion for broadband programs at FCC, NTIA, and USDA, the primary agencies that administer existing broadband deployment grant programs. And as we move forward now toward our 2023 Farm Bill, we must understand how these agencies plan to communicate and collaborate to effectively reach our shared goal of 100% nationwide coverage. And this is why we establish procedures for interagency coordination among USDA, NTIA, and FCC in the 2018 Farm Bill, and we must continue to engage with each other to ensure effective coordination, evaluate the agencies responding, and address any problems, any barriers that may exist. Rural broadband will continue to be a major focus of this committee. We take great pride in being able to finally, as a committee, make sure that our rural communities have the necessary funding. We previously held a committee hearing to examine any barriers to our broadband connectivity and solutions and opportunities to overcome any impediments. Ranking Member Thompson, my good friend, and I also introduced the Broadband Internet Connection for Rural America Act, which would make crucial and significant investments in the USDA broadband program to expand broadband in our rural communities. In other ways, I'd like to thank my good friend, Ranking Member, for his bipartisan cooperation. We did it together, Ranking Member Thompson, and willingness to work with me on this issue, and I appreciate that, Ranking Member. Thank you. We are always thankful to be joined by Undersecretary Tara Smalls, my good friend. We're so delighted to have her, and she is playing a critical role in making sure that we have this coordination, which is the key to our success. And we're grateful to hear from our second panel as well of outstanding witnesses. Your combined experiences and interactions with these agencies will help us get a clearer scope of how broadband deployment is working on the ground. And we look forward to your testimonies. Thank you. And with that, I'd now like to welcome my distinguished ranking member, the gentleman from Pennsylvania, whom I enjoy so much working with. And we did it together, Mr. Thompson. You're recognized for your.
Well, Chairman, thank you, and thank you for just being a great partner in our work on broadband, and thank you to this committee, completely unified in advancing the bill that we did. That was thoughtful and, quite frankly, would have been very, very effective of bridging the digital divide in rural America. And quite shame on those who control the House floor for not giving us an opportunity to at least have a vote, right? And you and I worked hard to try to
Yes, we
get that
did.
vote to occur. We're not successful, and but I'll address the alternative here in just a bit of what was passed, which was insufficient for rural America. As we've heard across multiple hearings this Congress, the need for better broadband connectivity in rural America is immense. In the past, I've talked about the checkerboard of connectivity in my home state of Pennsylvania, with some communities well served, while their neighbors, sometimes just down the road, down the street, struggle to download their emails. While broadband access used to be a luxury, today internet connectivity is essential. It is essential for performing daily activities. Life is increasingly conducted more and more through the internet, and modern living requires constant, reliable internet access to fully participate. Quite frankly, to rural America, or as I like to call it, essential America, it deserves to have the opportunity to compete for jobs, for economic opportunities, for educational opportunities, for healthcare access, all the things that come with when we bridge the digital divide. So it's unacceptable, this quilt patch approach that we have taken for many years. And it was time to stop that. I don't believe what was passed out of the House and was signed into law will do that, but I do believe in what we put together and worked together in a bipartisan way would have accomplished that. To address this need, the federal government has committed tens of billions of dollars, once again, over the past 15 years to fund new broadband systems across the country. The bipartisan infrastructure bill alone provided a staggering $42 billion for broadband infrastructure just last summer. Important to point out, and I think everyone in this room would agree, USDA and RUS in particular is the point to bridge the digital divide in rural America. And for those who don't know or are listening, USDA only got $2 billion. I don't have a lot of trust in NTIA or FCC. They received significant dollars back under the stimulus in 2010, and they failed to bridge the digital divide. It's just based on facts and observation. So, but I'm a big believer, and I'm really thankful for our witnesses we have here today from USDA. Today's multiple federal agencies, including USDA, NTIA, the FCC, and the Treasury, are each individually responsible for distributing billions in broadband aid under their purview. Coordinating the distribution of those funds is essential. Far too often we've seen huge appropriations become insufficient through wasteful spending, inadequate oversight, poor planning, duplicative application, where they go in and rebuild things that were built before versus reaching out to that last mile. And it will take a concerted effort between USDA. I actually believe it's going to take a better investment than $2 billion in USDA, and certainly better than concentrated effort between USDA, NTIA, and the FCC to ensure these taxpayer funds do not meet a similar fate. Now, I remain disappointed that USDA was largely excluded from playing in its essential role, and a role that it plays very effectively. We see that evidence of that each and every year in more of a piecemeal approach in bringing broadband and its unparalleled understanding and reach into rural communities. It is the best situated agency to help rural providers serve their communities, yet my colleagues in the Senate made a different choice, choosing instead to create a new series of programs that comes with new bureaucracy and, quite frankly, new administrative costs. It takes away from actually achieving all making that investment in resulting in full connectivity. And so in addition to focusing on coordination, we must also ensure these new programs are accessible, they're efficient, and they're effective for rural service providers. As these new agencies wade into the difficult work of bridging the digital divide, it is critical they focus on the unique needs of rural communities. Thank you to Madam Undersecretary for again being with us to talk rural broadband. I've always appreciated the work the Rural Utility Service does for our rural Americans. And thank you to our witnesses on the second panel. I look forward to hearing from each of you. I would be remiss if I didn't share my utter disappointment and, quite frankly, shock that representatives from the Federal Communications Commission and the National Telecommunications and Information Administration declined the invitation to testify today. Their absence is noted, and it illustrates their indifference towards the needs of rural Americans and our rural communities. Mr. Chairman, once again, I really appreciate you and our friendship and the work that we have been able to do together to advance good, strong bipartisan legislation to bolster USDA's broadband programs. I look forward to working with you on the upcoming Farm Bill to continue our work in strengthening rural connectivity. With that, I yield back.
Well, thank you, Ranking Member. Appreciate your comments. The chair would request that other members submit your opening statements for the record
I know you said
so
maybe
witnesses
next on
may
giving
begin
has
their
more room to give.
testimony and to ensure that there is ample time for questions.
Ask members to mute themselves.
Yeah, and members, please mute yourselves. We have very important business to do. We're asking our agencies to coordinate, and we've got to coordinate with the microphone. So please, let's mute ourselves until you come on and are recognized. And now I am pleased to welcome our first panelist. And this is a great person who's done great work here in Congress. And now she is the Undersecretary for Rural Development at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the Honorable Socio Therese Small. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Chairman Scott. Thank you, Ranking Member Thompson, and thank you, members of the committee. It's a joy to get to speak with you here today. As you know, high-speed internet is a utility essential to modern life. It's also a cornerstone of rural economic growth. It's not news to rural America, but everyone now knows the ugly truth when it comes to high-speed internet. So far, most of rural America has been left in the slow lane. In the middle of COVID, I got a call from a school superintendent in rural New Mexico, and he was at his wit's end doing everything he possibly could to make sure his rural kids didn't get left behind in the middle of the pandemic. And the truth was that families, hardworking families in Hondo, just didn't have the resources they need, didn't have the internet they needed to keep their kids online. Today, we're all reckoning with that reality. And because the situation is flatly unacceptable, Congress and President Biden have acted. Now, and we've heard this in your opening statements, agencies across the federal government have to work together to do something that's both essential and very difficult: bring connectivity and speed to rural America. Last month, Secretary Vilsack announced the department was investing the first tranche of the last round of Reconnect, $401 million to provide access to high-speed internet. Within that were multiple investments in rural places in New Mexico. And once completed, households in that very school district I mentioned will be able to get 100 megabytes per second symmetrical internet service. Now, you know as well as I do, we can't lay fiber overnight. And the federal government can be a slow train. When I was in Congress, the work of agencies, that implementation side of new laws and appropriations, too often felt like a black box. My commitment to you today is that the process of delivering high-speed internet to communities in need will not be opaque. It can't be. I've heard your comments in your opening statements, and I want to inform you on what we're doing with what we have now. Because it's too important, it has to be a team effort. It's the work of communication, the work of partnerships, the work of coordination. And let's be honest, sharing with one another across government silos hasn't been a strength historically. That's why USDA Rural Development is proud to serve as a critical coordinator for federal rural work. Through efforts like the Rural Partners Network, we're making sure that investments like the bipartisan infrastructure law reach rural America. We're working together across federal departments to be better partners in place-based work, to build a better front door to the federal government, and to make federal programs easier to access. When it comes to the historic investment in high-speed internet, coordination must be a way of life. That's why we meet with the FCC, NTIA, and the Treasury on a biweekly basis, and frankly, regularly more often, both to establish a regular cadence of communication and to work through those sticky issues. We're learning to lean into those sticky challenges. We're also working with state legislatures and state agencies, providing trainings, connecting with other agencies, and most importantly, asking questions about how we can be better partners. I promise you, this is much more than a stack of MOUs. We're keenly aware of both the importance of the work and the historic nature of this moment. We're in the early stages of an economic recovery from a global pandemic, but the promise and the initial work of high-speed internet is already making a difference, delivering speeds that are high enough to be long-lasting. I truly cannot think of a better time to deliver such powerful economic infrastructure to the communities that produce so much of America's food and energy. Going forward, I ask for your candor, and I'll give you mine. I'll ask for flexibility when possible, too. We owe our best efforts to the people of rural America, because I think we can all agree that when we invest in rural America, we're investing in all of our prosperity. Through this work, especially when we're really working together, Congress and the Biden administration are sending a message to rural America that we get it. We know the slow lane is unacceptable, and we're here to be true partners in building better futures for our nation. By delivering on this promise, we're bearing witness that rural matters. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your collaboration, and I look forward to your questions.
And thank you, Undersecretary Therese Small, for your excellent testimony. At this time, members will be recognized for questions in order of seniority, alternating between majority and minority members. And you will be recognized for 5 minutes each in order to allow us to get to as many questions as possible. And now, once again, please keep your microphones muted until you are recognized so that we can minimize background noise and get through our hearing in a very respectful way. Thank you. And now I recognize myself for our first 5 minutes. Undersecretary Torres, with this money, this $65 billion that we have gotten for this program, going out through several different agencies, oftentimes these agencies compete with one another. All kinds of problems develop that slow down or make an impediment of getting the money out. Not only with the federal agencies having to coordinate, but then you have your state agencies to coordinate as well. Treasury Department, Commerce Department, NTIA, USDA, FCC. I think we about got every alphabet in our alphabet here. But so, tell me, what agreements, what procedures need to be put in place to ensure that this broadband, $65 billion in resources across all these agencies are effectively utilized to reach our goal and finally connecting our rural communities?
Thank you so much, Chairman, for that question. And it is the big question. $62 billion is a huge investment, and the only way we reach the places we need to is if we coordinate. I'll be very honest with you, it is hard. There are silos. People are used to working within their agencies. But there's also benefits in terms of certain community members are used to working with rural development or used to working with FCC or used to working with NTIA. And so we're learning how to reach different people. And it's that required coordination, we're also learning from each other. So for example, NTIA helped with some of our outreach early on with tribal communities. And we also helped provide some support in reviewing some of their applications. One of the biggest challenges we've learned is that our work One of the hard parts is timing, making sure that our programs and the timing for our windows of application is aligned with timing for other programs. And it's going to become even more of a challenge when we are also working with the states. That's why we're trying to get out ahead of the game when it comes to states. We're meeting directly with state legislators and providing trainings on what Reconnect is so that they can find ways to supplement or do something different from what Reconnect does, and also with state agencies. So those are some of the ways we're trying to work together. And I'll turn it over to Acting Administrator Chris McLean if you have anything you want to add about it.
No, thank you very much. And the tradition of working across, thank you. Thank you. The tradition of working across agency boundaries and working with state regulatory agencies is something that's very familiar to the Rural Utilities Service. We've been in the telecommunications finance business since 1949. And we've had to work with leveraging FCC universal service support, working with state regulatory authorities through our financing. So we are very proud of working together across agency line, and as the Undersecretary said, the coordination sometimes is difficult. We have three, let's say, Treasury, NTIA, FCC, and ourselves, 4 different agencies with infrastructure money, and we have 4 separate statutes. We have to be faithful to our statutes, but we work really hard to resolve any disagreements or deconflict our investments with each other.
And let me just ask you, do you have an interagency plan of what is the specific roles of each of our federal agencies, and a plan of connecting and making sure there is smooth transition of getting the funding down to each of the states?
This is a really, really good question, because what we have are interagency agreements in terms of coordination. And with emerging technology like high-speed internet, it does require some flexibility. You've seen in terms of the conversations that we have regularly with Congress about speeds, for example, and different technologies. The flexibility is really crucial there, and it'll become all the more crucial when we're coordinating with states as well. So our priorities are regular coordination, that cadence, key guiding posts in terms of what we're doing, and then being flexible with each other.
Thank you very much. And now, the gentleman from Pennsylvania, our ranking member, Mr. Thompson, you're recognized for your 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Undersecretary Torres Moss, good to see you again. Thank you for your work, Mr. McLean. Thank you for your longstanding work as well. Much appreciated. As you, Undersecretary, as you know, USDA, FCC, NTIA, and Treasury entered into this interagency agreement in May of 2022, to collaborate on federal broadband programming and funding. Can you share any insight on the current collection and reporting of data and metrics related to broadband deployment between agencies, and have you run into any unexpected coordination challenges?
I appreciate that you asked for the challenges, because that's how we learn from these things, right? When it comes to the information collection, I think our different strengths are really well suited. So rural development's specific strength of when there's a conflict with a map, for example, we have to provide directly to each home. We have to make sure that each home within that service area has the service or ability to access that service. And so being able to identify on the ground whether or not that happens gives us data that we can then share with NTIA for NBAM, and then also making sure that FCC has access to it. We also go the other way. So as we look at different awards, making sure we have the data about where those awards are covering and how that interacts with our programs. So it has to go the other way, and the challenges really do circle around timing. So as we put out our rules, we have to make sure we know what other awards are going to be coming down the pipeline during that time. And for Reconnect 4, I think it was a really good example of how we learned that lesson. So we were very specific on RDOF, for example, and whether entities were ready to authorize, those awards were ready to authorize, which is a key step in the process. And so in Reconnect 4, we specifically said if they were made ready to authorize by this point, we would work to avoid overbuild. But having that clarity was really valuable, and that was a lesson learned.
Very good. Well, the FCC is, the way they've done their mapping in the past, and maybe that has changed. I certainly hope it is, and I think you can be you're part of that coordination, can be a force for good on this. I mean, the FCC by census zone would make two egregious errors, in the past. I'm not sure what the current process is, but, if they found that there were one or two entities within a census zone that had broadband connectivity, they would color the entire map as served, excluding everyone else. It may be a hospital, maybe a school, a university, and leaving out the large portion of the district from being eligible from these funds and development. And then the even more egregious one was the wording that said if the conditions exist by which connectivity should be occurring, despite the fact that no one in that census zone, and that's just two of the errors that I think that the FCC. So I'm appreciative of this. The fact that you'll be at the table on this, because I believe the FCC needs adult supervision and needs supervision of people that understand rural America. I'd be much more comfortable if you all were at the tip of the spear on this versus in the relationship that you have. But as you know, the USDA currently employs nearly 100,000 employees across more than 4,500 locations. Comparatively, NTIA and FCC retain almost 2,100 employees combined. Their resources aren't near as extensive, nor do they have the penetration into rural America the way our USDA professionals do. However, since 2020, 13 new broadband programs have been authorized and funded by Congress, none of which are administered by USDA. Shame on Congress. Shame on the administrations for allowing that to occur. Can you comment on why USDA's scope and scale are best suited to deliver broadband programs to rural America, and why is it so critical that USDA remain an integral player in broadband deployment?
Chairman Thompson, thank you so much for lifting up our staff at Rural Development and in USDA. It's absolutely a fundamental piece of who we are, having people living in the communities that we serve, and it's rare across the federal government, and that's why we've been asked to lead things like the Rural Partners Network, because that takes real connection with community so that we can listen to them and learn from them. And that's why we're a fundamental part of the solution when it comes to high-speed internet, because each situation is different. The geography, how do you get behind the nooks and crannies of mountains, or how do you lay fiber on the seafloor, and having that specific expertise as well as the partners on the ground is a crucial picture that we bring to the table.
Very good. Thank you, Chairman.
The gentlewoman from North Carolina, Miss Adams, who is also the vice chair of the Committee on Agriculture, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for hosting today's hearing. Thank you as well to the ranking member. Undersecretary Torres Small, it's a good pleasure to have you here with us today. Service is the rent we pay. And it gives me great pleasure to know that you're keeping your rent paid up with all of the great work that you are doing. We have discussed at length the bipartisan infrastructure law in our last farm bill to make significant investments in broadband, particularly in rural broadband. In my state of North Carolina, I'm proud that our Governor Roy Cooper announced a $206 million grant in grants from funding that we here in Congress provided to expand internet access for rural communities. 85,000 households will now have access to high-speed internet. More than 2,000 businesses will also have it. But it's more than just businesses that need this access. It is our rural schools too. So, Madam Undersecretary, can you discuss what these investments will mean for our K-12 and institutions of higher education in rural areas?
Thank you so much, Congresswoman, and it's wonderful to see you and for your focus on education, because when our kids in rural places are our future. And if we can make sure they have good education, it gives them a chance to build their best opportunities, hopefully in the rural communities where they live. And when it comes to high-speed internet, that's fundamental to that. So Reconnect's program, one of the requirements is that within a service area, every address has to be eligible to receive service. So you're not skipping schools or houses. And that's crucial because we certainly hear on the ground stories of internet service lines that go all the way except for that last house that's really hard to reach, or that last location. So that's one way that we reach education, is by connecting every address within, so that both at the school and at kids' homes, they can do their homework at home, is possible. The other way are there other programs within rural development. So we have the distance learning and telemedicine program, which helps provide some of the infrastructure, the hardware for using that high-speed internet, so that schools, applicants can receive funding to be able to get the best technology that allows their students to learn and prepare for careers in computer science, for example. So there's, and to learn, you can broaden your horizons in a rural place if you can connect with people all across the world. So those are two ways that we're working. Go ahead.
Great,
Sorry.
thank you. I do agree, and it's absolutely essential. It is life-changing. I've also heard from rural schools what happens when they aren't able to provide powerful internet connections to their students. They miss out on research opportunities, jobs, and a whole lot more. So, Madam Undersecretary, most states have a research and education network that provides high-speed internet access to schools, but not all schools are hooked up to those networks. And during our push to connect rural areas, what do you think we should do to ensure that our rural HBCUs and MSIs and tribal colleges can access these critical networks?
That's a great question, and I'd love to follow up with you about specific outreach that we can do to HBCUs if they're lacking that high-speed internet connection right now. Because one of our focuses at rural development has been, how do we reach out to potential partners? How do we make sure folks know how to navigate the Reconnect process, which can be challenging, and know about the other resources that are available as well. So I'd love for us to be able to follow up with you to talk about how we can intentionally reach out to HBCUs.
Okay, great. Well, we'll look forward to that. And thank you so much for being here and for your work. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back balance of my time.
Thank you. And now the gentleman from California, Mr. LaMalfa, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. Undersecretary, welcome. Thank you. Thank you for both attending today. Nice to see you. We wanted to point out that recently Rural Development awarded a $40 million Reconnect grant to the Volcano Telephone Company in Pine Grove, California, just not too far from my own district, but certainly the issues are common to a lot of Eastern California and Sierras. It'll help boost to high-speed internet in those mountainous areas and help with smoke detection, which is something that's very critical in our state as well as your home state with so much wildfire. And so with this technology and with this ability to better detect smoke and its density for health reasons, or an early jump perhaps on fire, what do you think we can do to even better utilize the current programs we have to monitor these disasters as they occur, in order to expedite emergency responses and better warn people about health warnings from dense smoke like that. So it seems like we're on a good path. What can we do to accelerate this, you think?
Thank you so much, Congressman LaMalfa. It's such a pleasure to see you. And I got the chance to talk with Volcano Telco, and I was so impressed with this 4th generation private ISP that's located in the community they serve. They talked about being really connected so that if internet service goes down because of a wildfire or other reasons, they've got people knocking on their door. I mean, that's how accountable they are, and it makes a real difference. I asked them specifically about speeds because they really are that last mile in the frontier, and how important is a high speed for them. And they specifically identified the video monitoring for smoke because that video monitoring in remote areas has to go up to a cloud for storage. So it requires not only download speeds, but upload speeds to upload that to storage, so they can identify where and keep running where the potential smoke is. So it was really helpful to understand how something is really that speed is really valuable even that far out. In terms of how we can better utilize this program to do things like that, the other thing they mentioned was making sure that electric wires, so working with rural electric co-ops or other electricity providers, so that they know when to shut off the power if they're in danger of wildfire or spreading a wildfire in the case of large winds. So I think that there's some other opportunities there to increase safety through high-speed internet.
Yeah, the wires are indeed a critical issue in our forested areas like that. Can you speak a little about how USDA, FCC, and NTIA all have their own data mapping and do not necessarily follow the same methods of collection of that data? So recent legislation has helped that we've passed here, that including the Broadband Data Act, to help better simplify this information and require information sharing. And you talked about the cross-pollination between agencies. So how do we ensure that those areas are mapped correctly, since we have these differing methods, and then we don't have inaccuracies from the different styles of are they that much different to begin with?
There are some differences. I think each iteration is getting better, and we're working together much better as well. I remember when I was in Congress, the census tract issue was the bane of my existence, because out in the West, you've got big states, you've got big land, and a census tract is not an accurate area of measurement for whether or not you have high-speed internet. That is changing. It is work, though. We're learning a lot from states and their mapping efforts, and Georgia is a key example where there's been some really exciting progress, and we're sharing that information. So MBAM with NTIA has been really good about sharing information and collecting it. And so, frankly, our different ways of collecting information has been helpful with NBAM, because we are able to get information in different ways, cross-reference it, cross-check it on a mapping platform. As we look to FCC and the fabric that they have, as well as the updates, we're working there as well. I mentioned we all have different relationships with different people. They're used to working with different agencies. And so we helped get out the word for the deadline for internet service providers to make sure they were providing information to FCC for the creation of their maps.
Do you have, I'm sorry, I'm going to run out of time. Do you have concerns that linking with these other sources could somehow harm your own data mapping? Do you have any concerns about that?
Oh, that's a really good question. I'd love to follow up with you to see if just to ask generally to my team. None have risen to me because we're sharing really well and because we're using multiple sources of information. And lastly, because we have that ground checking capability. So if there are conflicts about the different mapping, we can go on the ground and check to see if the service. But I'll get back if we find any others.
Okay, also check too, see, do you have any concerns that might slow down USDA's current process on its own funding? And I'll just leave that there, so thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sure. The gentlewoman from Maine, Ms. Pingree, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much for having this important hearing. And thank you, too, to Madam Undersecretary. We're so pleased to have you in that position and before our committee today, and working hard on this really important topic to rural states like mine. Some people don't think about New England being rural, but Maine is considered one of the most rural states in the nation. We have a lot of distance between internet service providers. We have some of the slowest speeds and lack of availability. So this has been plaguing us for a long time, and our state is very interested in repairing the problem. One thing I've dealt with quite a bit are the issues around the Reconnect program. When you have a small community, as we do, and I represent over 100 small communities, many of them under 10,000 people, under 5,000 people, there's rarely the level of staffing that is needed. And what we hear very often is that it's a part-time employee, maybe a volunteer for the town, that is trying to deal with very extensive and complicated reporting requirements. So can you talk to us a little bit about technical assistant provisions that are in place and how we can do more, or what you're doing now to really give ground level support to those communities who need to be getting the access to these programs that we're funding?
Congresswoman Pingree, thank you so much for that question. Technical assistance is one of the key opportunities and frankly challenges when it comes to serving rural places. If you have a volunteer mayor or a part-time clerk, it's really hard to apply for all these grants. And then if you catch that car, and then you've got to drive it in terms of the reporting requirements. So one, we're working to make it more simple, but two, we're also working on technical assistance. And rural development is using some of the administrative funds from the bipartisan infrastructure law to increase and to build upon that great staff structure that Chairman Thompson or that Ranking Member Thompson mentioned, and that is crucial when it comes to reaching those hard-to-reach places. I also, in your bipartisan bill on to authorize Reconnect, I really appreciate the work that Chairman Scott and Ranking Member Thompson put in for broadband connectors, recognizing the need for continued investment in technical assistance. So really appreciate that you're continuing to see that. And I'll note that NTIA is also investing significantly in technical assistance. We're coordinating to make sure that technical assistance doesn't overlap, but rather supports each other. They're focusing mostly on interacting with state agencies and state broadband offices, and our technical assistance is more focused on the providers, the internet service providers.
I just want to follow up a little bit because it's an issue I've brought up previously. It's an issue we've been hearing about over the years. We've been told that there are some technical assistance people that are called general field representatives that are meant to be there to help and support, but we often get the feedback that there aren't enough, that they're spread over a wide range. I don't know how many each state GFR covers, how many states each GFR covers. But again, I know, I feel like every time I have this conversation, and I have great faith in you accomplishing this, we hear like, oh, that's going to come, we're working on it. Can you talk at all about anything else you might need? Should there be more language in the Farm Bill? I guess I'll just emphasize again, if our main goal here, and everybody on this committee talks about rural America, we're also supportive of doing more for rural America. But just as you acknowledged in the beginning, and I appreciate that, you're talking about small communities that really need on the ground kind of technical assistance and need to have the ability to apply for and then manage these funds. And do you see this happening in the near future? Do we need to write language in the Farm Bill? What can we do to just assure it really comes to be?
Thank you for holding our feet to the fire on this. It's something we need to deliver. And the first thing I'll note, the administrative funds in the bipartisan infrastructure law really were helpful in terms of helping us work to set up more technical assistance. We have hired more GFRs as a result of that. But one of the challenges is hiring and creating the right position descriptions and making sure that it truly does result in bringing someone on board. And that's a place where I'd like to have a deeper dialogue. I'll turn it over to Acting Administrator for any additional points.
No, thank you very much. And staffing is always an issue for us. We're a remarkably small agency that does a remarkable amount of work. There's at any given time, about 100 or 20 telecom staffers that are delivering this massive program. We're very, very proud of that work. We have about 25 or so GFRs in telecom and about 23 or so in electric at any given time. And that's to cover the whole country. So we are not able to have a GFR in every single state, but we try to maximize our outreach. We use contract support. We have had webinars to try to help communities.
Unfortunately, the gentleman's time has expired, but that's very valuable information. Please communicate it in writing to us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We're
Thank you,
after
Mr. Chair.
smooth sailing to get this year, so please get that to him. And now I recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Rouser, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Ms. Small, great to see you, and Administrator, thank you for being here as well. All of my life I heard about haves and have-nots, and I have decided over the last 5 to 10 years that those in the have category have high-speed internet access, and those who are in the have-not category, are without it. It bridges racial divides, demographics, and really it's all geography. Just like many other members of Congress, I have a lot of communities that have good access, and I have a lot of communities that do not have good access. And it is a critical piece of infrastructure, as we all know. So quick question, just overall basics, your overall portfolio, how much is, if you look at all the programs, how much is grant, how much is loan, and how much is loan guarantee?
Oh, that's a great question. So in terms of Reconnect, the most recent round, Reconnect 4, has $150 million is available for loans. The max request is $50 million for that. For a 50% loan, so 50-50 grant loan combination, up to $150 million is available for loans, and $150 million is available for grants. And then there's 100% grants. And so there's $150 million available as a set aside, or for all full grant applications. And then there's also a set aside for tribes, colonias, persistent poverty areas, some have-nots, socially vulnerable communities, as well as Alaska Native corporations. And then there's also a separate set aside of $200 million for projects serving areas where 90% of households lack sufficient access to broadband.
Mm-hmm. How much is loan guarantee? Are we doing much in the area of loan guarantee?
Not in high-speed internet, but in other programs, it's a fundamental part. So B&I loan guarantee, for example, and community facilities.
Well, broadband is a tricky subject because technology changes so rapidly. I think fiber is going to be a critical component for some time to come. How do you make your judgments on investments as it relates to very rapidly changing technology?
That is such a great question, and it's that emerging technology piece that makes it challenging to navigate. We focus primarily on speed. What's the build-out speed that you can get to based on the technology? There's also some statutory limitations. Reconnect requires us to refer to a law that talks about fixed broadband, terrestrial or wireless, and so that limits some of our flexibility. In the first 2 rounds of Reconnect, we tried to use as much flexibility as we could in some emerging technologies, but didn't have many takers, frankly. So for Reconnect 4, we're focusing on the speed build-out and the technologies where we've had interest, but it's an open dialogue, it's a changing conversation, and we'd love to continue that conversation with you.
So with regard to Reconnect, the program has a number of administrative burdens, which make it a little difficult, time-consuming, and cumbersome, for some, or actually many providers, from what I hear. So the program requires, and this is an example, the program requires the provider to submit significant information regarding non-funded service areas, and also requires all environmental approvals to be obtained in sequential order rather than filed and reviewed concurrently. How are y'all working through these burdens? And doesn't it make sense to streamline this and have these objectives reviewed concurrently?
Thank you so much, Congressman, and I will say a little bit and then pass it over to to Administrator McLean. We absolutely have to work to make it as accessible as possible, recognizing that these are big projects that require sophisticated administration. The information about outside areas that aren't funded but are covered helps us support those maps that we were just talking about and make sure we are navigating the overbuild situation, making sure that we're doing as much as we can to leverage what we have to reach the places that are unreached. When it comes to environmental reviews, there's been a real learning curve. The first 2 rounds of Reconnect, we were casting a broader net, frankly, than what the law called for in terms of both timing and when it was necessary to do consultation. So we've shifted the timing there, and we think we have the appropriate match. But there's still work to be done. In terms of sequential environmental reviews, I'll pass it over to Acting Administrator McLean.
Yeah, thank you very much. And another thing about round 1 and round 2 was the effect of the pandemic. It had particularly in those early months when there was a total lockdown, historic preservation offices were closed at tribal level and state level. So environmental review just elongated. So we worked very hard to try to expedite environmental review as much as possible. But it's a point well taken, and
the gentleman's time has expired. Sorry about that. If you could communicate your thoughts in writing to him,
Thank you.
would be great. And now the gentlewoman from New Hampshire, Ms. Custer, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I so appreciate the committee holding this important hearing on access to broadband communication in our rural communities. Compared to even just a generation ago, the services and tools available to us now with the click of a button are absolutely remarkable and essential. Essential government services, medical check-ins, school courses, and job training are all accessible at the time and place of our choosing. Reliable, affordable, high-speed broadband service is what makes those things possible. And while it brings incredible benefits, it also exacerbates the gap for those who do not have access to the service or simply cannot afford it. We have talked for many years, and I've been a proud member of Mr. Clyburn's Rural Broadband Task Force. Finally, I'm so excited that Congress is matching our words to our actions. In the past 2 years, we've enacted targeted programs and made historic investments to bridge the digital divide. This includes efforts not only aimed at building the physical infrastructure to support broadband networks, but to ensure that this essential service is affordable to our rural, hardworking families. Some of those programs have already begun dispersing funds and connecting communities. The remaining are being stood up now as we speak. Just last week, I'm proud to announce that New Hampshire received $66 million in broadband funding under the American Rescue Plan Capital Projects Fund, bringing the total to $122 million to help connect more than 24,000 Granite State homes and businesses to affordable high-speed internet. It'll be crucial for the agencies administering these programs to communicate and coordinate so that the investments are effective and efficient in reaching the greatest number of my constituents. And that's why I'm pleased that we enacted legislation in the 2020 Consolidated Appropriations Bill to create a new office at the NTIA tasked with tracking and coordinating broadband deployment and funding and programs all across the government. We also required USDA, NTIA, and FCC to enter into a memorandum of understanding to ensure they're sharing data about their respective broadband deployment programs. All of this builds on the progress that we all fought so hard for in the 2018 Farm Bill, boosting grants and loans for broadband infrastructure by $350 million per year. And as we look ahead to writing the new Farm Bill next year, I'm determined to build upon these critical wins and further enhance USDA's broadband programs. Madam Undersecretary, great to be with you. You mentioned the distance learning and telehealth grant program. That's such an important component of expanding broadband. Could you comment? I know you've done a lot of travel and talked to applicants. On the feedback you've heard, is there anything that we need to do legislatively to help further streamline the process and support applicants, particularly you pointed out?
Congresswoman Custer, I lost the last part of your question, but I think you're asking about how we can streamline programs like the distance learning and telemedicine program.
Sorry to interrupt. If you need anything for us to do legislatively to help you streamline those programs.
Thank you so much for that question. It's a crucial piece. One of the things we hear regularly across our programs that can be hard, and that was done in our high-speed internet funding, is providing no match grants when available. It's helped us reach the most socially vulnerable, the persistent poverty counties. It's really crucial. And also allowing us some flexibility in the tools that we provide. But for some specific commentary on the distance learning and telemedicine, I'll turn it over to Administrator McLean.
Thank you.
The distance learning telemedicine program is one of our most popular programs across the board. We consistently have more applications than we have funding available to be able to meet those needs. And it's always heartbreaking to have to leave projects still on the table. But fortunately, Congress, year after year, has been able to provide us support, and we do appreciate that.
Great. One quick question, and maybe you'll need to submit in writing, but I strongly concur with your sentiments about how access to reliable telehealth services helps ease the provider gap in our rural communities. And wondering if you could share insights you've heard about how USDA broadband programs have opened up new telehealth options.
Someone even went so far as to say it's a recruitment tool. A nurse who was trying to get other folks to apply to her rural hospital said once they were able to get the technology that worked with high-speed internet to be able to reach more people in their homes, the workforce was just more excited to be there because they could better do their job.
Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you.
The gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Allen, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for hosting this hearing. And Madam Undersecretary, thank you for your attendance this morning. Obviously, increasing broadband, well, actually completing broadband to all rural Americans has been my top priority here in Congress. There's nothing that holds back rural America from continued economic development than broadband and cell service. Since I was first elected, there has been a major broadband build-out, but we saw apparent shortfalls in that during the COVID pandemic, particularly with education and then the ability for people to actually get the job done when they were living in rural America. Right now, for the first time, it appears that funding may not be the most pressing issue. More than $147 billion in federal funding has been dedicated to broadband in the last 4 years alone. This is a lot of money, and it's time for us to take account on exactly where in the heck the money is. To that point, I am disappointed that the Federal Communications Commission and the National Telecommunications and Information Administration are not represented in this hearing today. Of all the committees in Congress, there is no question that the House Agriculture Committee is the one most in tune with the needs of rural America. I urge the leadership of this committee to convene a separate hearing in the future where we can hear from the leadership of these agencies as well. I said earlier that I believe at this moment funding is not necessarily the #1 concern that Congress should have. Instead, it should be broadband mapping. In July of last year, I led a bipartisan, bicameral group of Georgia lawmakers in sending a letter to the FCC requesting an update on implementation of the Broadband Deployment Accuracy and Technological Availability Act, which was signed into law last Congress. Additionally, we requested that they integrate data from the Georgia Broadband Map program into their new mapping program. Unfortunately, since Chairwoman Rosenworcel is not represented here today, I cannot ask her about the implementation of the Data Act. Madam Undersecretary, do your agencies rely on FCC maps to distribute broadband funds?
Thank you so much, Congressman, for making high-speed internet a top priority and for your focus on mapping. It's a crucial part of how we need to coordinate across the federal government and, as you mentioned, with states that have had some of the most cutting-edge approaches to mapping. When it comes to rural development, we are intimately involved in providing information for both NTIA's NBAM map as well as the FCC's map that they are constructing. And we use NBAM to help as part of the process for identifying our service areas for our awards. Yeah. We have multiple components of the process, so we use the maps for a desktop review. Then the second part is allowing service providers to weigh in to say, no, actually, we cover this area, and here's the data to show that. And then we have on the ground.
How accurate do you find these maps to be?
For that, I'll refer to Acting Administrator McLean.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, over time, the maps have improved. The reference to census block mapping didn't provide much granular data. So the mapping material that we've had historically and that we use now, they're informative, they're a starting point, they're not dispositive for RUS's work. As the Undersecretary said, that we have what's called a service area validation process where our applicants will proclaim to the world where they're going to propose service. We will open up a 45-day comment period where we'll allow service providers to tell us what they are providing, and we will check that. We will verify that, and if necessary, we'll send field staff out to the area to be able to double check that.
Well, my home state of Georgia broadband map program is the gold standard in the nation's broadband maps. It precisely maps out the availability of broadband services to every home and business in the state. Other states are following Georgia's leads and implementing similar programs. So we have the maps, we know the needs in Georgia, and of course, Madam Secretary, I believe you were in Georgia recently meeting with broadband providers, including my constituent Stephen Milner, with whom I've worked on many broadband rollout projects in my district. Could you provide us an update on how those meetings went and what your takeaway was? And I'm out of time. You can submit that answer in writing. I would appreciate that. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. And now the gentlewoman from Illinois, Ms. Bustos, who is also the chair of the Subcommittee on General Farm Commodities and Risk Management, is recognized for 5 minutes.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. I know that rural broadband is obviously a very important issue for everybody on this committee. And I see it this way. Fortunately, Congress has been investing in programs to reconnect. And so we've been able to deliver under the Undersecretary's leadership and under the Biden administration these crucial investments. And let me just give you a quick example. We have $14 million that went to Joe Carroll Energy, which is a rural electric co-op in the congressional district that I represent. They've been able to expand their fiber broadband and go into 3,000 additional households. That's a big deal where I'm from. They are now able to serve on top of that 10 educational facilities and a healthcare facility just with that funding. And so I know USDA recently announced a $1 billion for Reconnect Round 4 that comes out of our bipartisan infrastructure law. So Undersecretary Torres Small, great to see you. Thank you for being here today. Can you talk about how this new round of the Reconnect program is different from previous rounds? In other words, what's changed?
Thank you so much for that question. And we really are learning things in every stage of Reconnect. We're also trying to provide some consistency where at all possible for our applicants while applying lessons learned. So one of the places where we've seen a difference in terms of, the change from statute for round 4 of Reconnect is the service area. So the statute requires that, it used to require 90% be unserved, now it requires 50% unserved. And so that's a change that we've made pursuant to the statute. That being said, Congress also included a set-aside for 90% unserved, so we can continue to prioritize reaching the hardest-to-reach places. And so we're working hard to get out information about that change. A change that we made specifically was that we work to make sure that not only is there infrastructure in the ground, but that it's affordable. And so we worked in the previous round, there were extra points for participating in an FCC affordability program. Almost everyone who was eligible to receive those points took advantage of it. So we went ahead and made it mandatory this next round to work with the FCC Affordable Connectivity Program. And so what that means is that in areas where we're helping fund a service, people could get access with a $30 plan for high-speed internet. And that can be truly transformative.
Yeah, let me, because I know we just have a couple of minutes here, and I'd like to get onto another topic. I know we're talking about rural broadband, but are you in a position where you can talk about the importance of rural connectivity as it pertains to rural cellular? I can talk about actually my own household, my neighbors. We have a district where we have access to broadband, but not necessarily to cell service that allows us to have easy phone conversations on our cell lines. And, it gets in the way of emergency services, precision agriculture, and just household cell service. So wondering if there are activities currently underway at USDA Rural Development to help expand access to rural cell service. And if you can touch on that for our remaining minute and a half.
I'll speak very quickly and then turn it over to Acting Administrator. The statute does limit, we can't take into account cell phone service when determining whether or not broadband exists. But one part of our priority points include wholesale broadband services, and that can mean building infrastructure that others could use. And so when it comes to building a cell phone tower, that requires that backhaul of fiber to then connect to that tower. And so with wholesale broadband services, there's an ability to also invest in both radio technology as well as cell phone service. Acting Administrator McLean?
Yes, thank you very much. In addition, we do have loan authority to finance mobile wireless, and we do have loan authority to finance emergency communications and 911 access, but we don't have a grant program to match that. But the point is very, very well taken. Cellular dead zones are deadly zones when it comes to public safety and emergency communications.
Yeah, they really are. My husband's the sheriff of Rock Island County, which is a little more urban than some of the other counties I represent. And I know our sheriffs talk about these dead zones. And you think about when you need to communicate in a time where there's something tragic going on, you don't want your deputies out there not being able to communicate with their radio operators or their other deputies. So we can explore this a little bit more, but I'm hoping that we can in the future and make this more accessible. Thank you very much. I yield back.
The gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Baird, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, for holding this important meeting. As you know, and it's already been talked about here today, but precision agriculture really needs and utilizes the broadband in addition to telehealth and telecommunication and education. So it's very important that we do this. And so I guess the thing that I'd like to ask is, Madam Undersecretary, you did a great job explaining how USDA monitors the broadband deployment to make sure that we have efficient and complete build out. So can you explain to me or add to us how the general field representatives and how important they are to make sure that we get this build out done efficiently and we have the right kind of information to help our local entities apply for some of these funds?
Congressman Baird, thank you so much for that question. Our general field representatives are crucial, and they're a unique part of rural development. It's people living in the places they serve. Lately, I've had the chance to travel and do outreach to communities that currently don't have high-speed internet. And when I have a general field representative there, they know the providers that are around the table. They know how to work with communities that what they know is that they don't have high-speed internet, and they're trying to figure out what that next step is. And so that ability to help navigate these really high-tech, challenging, complicated issues is crucial. And they are working hard, whether it's trying to make sure that the environmental reviews are happening quickly, or whether it's going back and forth. And now, I was talking to a general field representative just the other day. He's really proud that there's been so many awards in his region, but now he's got to process all of those awards. And because we really care about efficiency, it's reimbursements. So that processing of the award is high touch. It takes a lot of energy. So it's a crucial component of who we are at rural development, and it's something that we need to continue to make sure is a strong part of our identity.
I think that's. You just illustrated an important point. If those individuals really understand where the money can come from and the different sources and the requirements for applying for those, I think it just makes it more efficient and it extends your capabilities right out into the rural community. So I'm glad that you have those field representatives, and I hope you can train more in case you need them for additional help. One other area that I'd like to mention, I know USDA, and I appreciate it, keeps a close watch on the funds and where they're going. Yet I've heard from some of my people and recipients about the frustration in accessing their funds. In fact, sometimes their construction activity has been delayed because they couldn't get access to the funds they've been approved for. So what changes can Congress, or what can we do to better balance the need for robust oversight and yet at the same time make sure we can expedite the construction process?
That's a great question, and one that I would love to continue to work with you to try to resolve, because it's a balance, right? How do we make sure that the money is being used effectively and efficiently while also making it easy and quick for deployment? One of the changes we have made is allowing ISPs to purchase the materials before the environmental review is complete so that they can plan, especially with some of the challenges we're seeing there. But there are still work to do. Another change is in the environmental review process. Again, that coordination, that timing of when we need to be doing outreach, and then also working to make sure that we're communicating that quickly with the ISP. Acting Administrator McLean, do you want to add anything?
No, thank you very much, and I think that appreciate the comments about the general field representatives. They are absolutely the foundation of our work. We have one of our GFRs say that it's not a job, it's a lifestyle. I mean, it is really rewarding to be able to see their work. Yes, environmental review is a challenge, and it's about capacity. It's about having enough staff to be able to process those procedures, and we have to be able to complete the environmental review before we can release funds and before construction can start under the statutes that we have to enforce, the Endangered Species Act, National Environmental Policy Act, and the Historic Preservation Act. And we value and respect those statutes, but we work very hard to be able to get the funds out as quickly as possible.
Thank you. And now the gentleman from California, Mr. Carvajal, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the witnesses and my friend, Undersecretary Torres Small, for being here today. Broadband access is required to participate in the modern economy. As such, we must make sure every single American has access to reliable, high-speed internet. Broadband allows people to access education, healthcare, employment, the online marketplace, and much, much more. Congress has made significant investments over the last decade to expand broadband. Recently, the bipartisan infrastructure law provided $65 billion in broadband funding. I'm heartened to see the progress USDA and other agencies make as they continue to roll out this funding. And I look forward to working with you as we bring more communities online. Undersecretary Torres Small, can you describe how USDA is doing outreach to communities who lack broadband access and help make them aware of funding opportunities? Within these communities, is the USDA able to provide technical assistance, or are more resources needed?
Thank you so much, Congressman Carvajal. It's wonderful to see you. And it's such a great question, this theme about technical assistance and how do we make sure we're reaching communities that aren't the usual suspects who already know how to navigate our programs. One of the things we're doing, and I recognize the irony in this, is webinars, but so that way folks they don't have to travel to to learn about it. And our Innovation Center has been very helpful in making sure we're providing really comprehensive training on those webinars. But you have to have high-speed internet to access that. So we also have our robust staff on the ground, over 450 offices across the United States, and folks who are used to going out and traveling. I just drove 4 hours to visit a Navajo chapter that had not received an internet reconnect grant, and we paired them with someone nearby who had, and had a conversation about what it was like to take that next step from, we know we don't have high-speed internet, what do we do next? So being able to have validators who've navigated a tough process, be able to help walk through an applicant about future opportunities is a great way to do that. That takes time, that takes staff, that takes a lot of travel across really rural places and dirt roads, and that's why that's why our GFRs are so crucial.
Thank you. I would encourage you to also look at natural facilitators that already exist, or folks who interface with many of those underserved communities. There's already a lot of vehicles there that could be a win-win by partnering to multiply the education, the information that is being attempted to be disseminated. Undersecretary, can you also elaborate on the successes of the Community Connect grant program and the distance learning and telehealth grant program? Do you think these programs can be improved to benefit more people?
Thank you so much for that. One quick thing on existing facilitators, it's such a crucial point. What it makes me think of is in our water and environmental programs, our circuit riders, and then also a relationship we have with RCAP. So other people on the ground who have other relationships, they're trusted partners in the community. When it comes to distance learning and telemedicine, it's a crucial part of the mix. Having the internet infrastructure on the ground or on the poles is one thing. You also have to have the technology to be able to use it. And one of the places I see that the most is in rural hospitals, because you're able to reach people who then don't have to drive miles just to get the health care they need. And it also allows opportunities in terms of clinics to do a lot more preventative work. And when I think especially about obstetrics, like what does it mean to start your life in the rural community you want to call home, and be able to have that prenatal care, the ability to go directly and provide service directly into a home through a distance learning and telemedicine grant can be really powerful. Acting Administrator McLean, do you want to add anything there?
Thank you very much. And one of the areas that we've observed growing of interest in distance learning telemedicine has been in telepsychology and teleconsultations, and also a treatment of addiction or prevention through prescription monitoring. So it's a very exciting technology, and you get better health results in rural communities because you're able to connect using telemedicine.
Thank you. I also want to draw your attention to maybe an alternative point of view. We oftentimes think of reaching the home, but even if we could connect with one center in their community so they don't have to drive miles away, but they could go to a center that's technologically equipped for them to have those consultations. I would encourage you to look at that as a possibility.
The gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Balderson, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here today, Madam Undersecretary. It's good to see you again. During your last visit to the committee, I expressed my concerns regarding the significant changes to the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act made to the Reconnect program's underserved threshold. As you know, the infrastructure bill only requires 50% of households to be underserved instead of 90%. Building on that, I'm concerned that without using the FCC's maps, a significant amount of Reconnect funding could go to areas that are already considered served, or even to areas that will be funded by the FCC's RDOF program or the NTIA's BEAD program. With this in mind, can you tell me specifically how USDA is going to prevent duplication in phase 4 of Reconnect?
Thank you so much for that question. It's a crucial component. How do we make sure we're leveraging our resources as efficiently as possible? So in terms of, we are following the statute, right, that has a 50% unserved, but we are also making sure that we're getting the word out about the set aside of non-match grant that goes to 90% unserved. And so prioritizing reaching the most unserved through that means as well. We talked earlier in this hearing about the importance of timing when it comes to different awards. And so we're working carefully in coordination to forecast when our windows will be open and identify, you mentioned RDOF, for example, what the timing is for when they'll declare certain projects ready to authorize. And that's something we've done very intentionally in Reconnect Round 4 is say when we will consider an RDOF award and when we will not. And so if it's been ready to authorize by a specific date, then we will not consider an area that's covered by an RDOF award.
Thank you. My next question would be, you may be aware that in a recent GAO report, Reconnect was identified as one of the 133 federal programs administering broadband support. Excuse me. With all of these new COVID-era programs, how are you coordinating with the NTIA, the FCC, and other agencies to ensure Reconnect funds are not duplicated or overbuilding other programs?
That is crucial to this work. And there are challenges. We talked about the silos and just folks being used to always doing one thing and knowing who to call within their agency. And we've got to now change that so that we know who to call across the agency. The MOUs are, of course, the foundation for that, but they cannot be the end of it. We have biweekly meetings to set up that regular cadence of communication, but also are working hard to reach out to each other proactively whenever there's a sticky situation. We've also worked to reach out for opportunities too. So combining on webinars for outreach so we can provide information on both programs, sharing staff for review of applications, and to speak a little bit more specifically, I'll turn it over to Acting Administrator McLean.
Yeah, thank you very much. The key is to sharing data in real time. We share our applicant data as well as our award data with our colleagues across the federal agencies as soon as it's available. Coincidentally, this afternoon, I'm having a meeting with my colleagues in NTIA, Treasury, and FCC. So we have regular coordination, and we do work on cases individual to deconflict applications. None of the federal agencies want to pay for the same thing twice. Now, there will be cases where we might not be able to deconflict because we have to be true to our statutes. We are faithful to the laws that this committee has endorsed, but to the extent we can work with our colleagues in other federal agencies and eventually across state lines when the BEAD money goes through the states, we will engage fully and be transparent and open with all of our data.
Thank you, sir, and thank you, Undersecretary. I can't see my clock, Mr. Chairman, so I will yield back my time. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And the gentlewoman from Washington, Ms. Schreier, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome again to my friend Undersecretary Torres Small. It is so good to see you again. I'd like to touch on a few issues with you quickly. As you know, my district in Washington State benefits greatly from the rural broadband programs authorized in the Farm Bill, and I'm so happy that we can talk about them today because they are critical, as we've seen during the pandemic. We also have a lot of players in Washington State. We have an excellent state broadband office. We have public utility districts who have invested heavily, local municipalities, private partners, and more. And I've heard from those entities, but also from several of my colleagues today about this concern about the USDA, NTIA, and the FCC all communicating to ensure there's no duplication around programs, and that not only can these programs be utilized to their fullest extent, but also that they can be additive and really amplify each other's benefits. And so I was not going to ask a question about this, but rather just emphasize what several of my colleagues have pointed out, that coordination is critical. I did have a question, though, about, in addition to the coordination, are there gaps or places where Congress can be helpful in aiding with the streamlining in the upcoming Farm Bill?
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Schreier, for that. The coordination is crucial, the requirement that we share data has been incredibly helpful. And as Acting Administrator McLean mentioned, noting that it's real time, making sure that data is really real time is really valuable. The other piece that we've learned in terms of timing is the announcements of our awards and when windows will be open and working to coordinate better there. So I think it's a place where we'd like to have an open dialogue. In addition, there are opportunities with the fact that we've got different players in this space. There's different relationships. There's different people who are used to accessing those streams of funding. But ways that we can better learn from each other is something I'm really interested in pursuing. Acting Administrator McLean, do you have anything to add there?
No, I think that was very well stated. In terms of its flexibility is very useful to us. We have multiple programs which we administer, sometimes with year-to-year changes in the requirements. And the ability to transfer funds. We were able to pull some IIJA money forward to be able to fund out of round 3. That was a very useful tool, but we're limited to do future pulling forward money because they have different requirements. So that's something I think to bear in mind is the flexibility that the agencies have and the department has to be able to move money to where it's needed most.
Thank you. I think we'll have to continue to work on this to make sure we get this right because it's such a big investment and so important in our districts. Also, I know there have been some concerns about coordination around the Reconnect program and specifically the middle mile infrastructure to ensure that the rural areas are getting the attention they need, both in unserved areas and underserved areas. And having a coordinated approach with shared mapping and accurate mapping would help these efforts. So, Madam Undersecretary, in the time you have remaining, can you talk about how your office plans to incorporate the new FCC map that's been announced as you consider USDA programs?
Thanks so much. So as you know, we currently use the NTIA NBAM as part of our desktop review when we determine where service areas are, and then of course we allow ISPs to challenge that, and then we, if necessary, get on the ground to determine that. But we're also supporting the FCC in creating their map, which NTIA will later rely on to distribute the BEAD money. So I just made an announcement in multiple venues with ISPs because the end of the deadline for their time to submit information for the creation of the map was coming up, and I was just saying, please don't forget, this is why it's important. And so leveraging our relationships to make sure that they're doing that. So that mapping collaboration is crucial. You also mentioned middle mile, and this is absolutely true. I was just in a meeting with multiple rural electric teleco cooperatives, and they were talking about, well, Reconnect doesn't fund middle mile, but sometimes if you create the service area in a way where you're connecting two places, you can build out where you otherwise wouldn't. That being said, there are places where you need middle mile and you can't ultimately reach a final house. And so we've been forecasting that to state agencies because, sorry.
Thank you. I'm sorry. We're trying to get everybody in. Votes are going to be coming up quickly. We have a second panel. We want to accomplish it all.
I yield back.
The gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Mann, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. That's loud. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Turn that down a little bit. I represent the 1st District of Kansas, 63 primarily rural counties in western central part of the state. In my part of the country, we greatly rely on broadband to connect our communities to one another and to the rest of the world with telehealth. A lot of things we talked about this morning, precision agriculture, and to plug into global markets, which is what our producers are dealing with every single day. So many Americans and Kansans are still unserved and underserved, and we should be making sure our taxpayer dollars are being spent judiciously on existing programs and that the goals set by the USDA or the FCC must be realistic and be able to be met with by providers. What checks are in place to ensure that the USDA implements its programs as efficiently and cost effectively as possible? And do you feel like we're stretching these dollars as far as we possibly can to reach as many people as we possibly can?
It's so important because this is a historic investment. We've got to make sure it goes in the right places. And we rural development is unique in this work. We were talking earlier about that delicate balance of, because we're a reimbursement program. It's unlike other programs out there. We reimburse for existing expenses. And so that makes sure that we're applying it efficiently and that we're truly documenting that every house and address within that service area can be served. But it does mean you have to administer that award in a different way, and that's time intensive. So that's one of the balances we're walking. The other point you mentioned was what's realistic, right, in terms of the speed. I'm guessing you might be thinking of in Reconnect Round 3, we changed the threshold to 100 down, 20 up, which is higher than it was previously, and then the build out to 100 megabytes per second symmetrical. We talked about some of the reasons why that's valuable, right? That upload speed so that rural people can be creators as well as users, and also for things like precision ag or smoke detection, being able to upload to the cloud. We also found that it was desirable. We had more applications in Reconnect Round 3 than in both other 2 rounds combined. So we're seeing ISPs really step up to this challenge, and it's exciting.
Great, thank you. Second question for you again, Madam Undersecretary. We've heard from numerous stakeholders how difficult it is to provide broadband services, and as you know, USDA, FCC, NTIA all have their own data mapping, and we talked this a little bit earlier, and they don't necessarily follow the same collection methods. This is near and dear to me because when I was Lieutenant Governor of our state, the FCC produced a map that was inaccurate. We then had to go and partner with the Farm Bureau to challenge their bad work product and show them how it was inaccurate when they're the ones that produced the bad work product in the first place. Of course, we talked this earlier, but Congress has passed the Broadband Data Act to help better simplify the information, require information sharing. How does RUS ensure that those communities are mapped correctly in the first place and that the data is integrated into the broader FCC maps? I know you talked about that a little bit earlier, but could you expand upon how do we do a better job of making sure that we have accurate maps in the first place?
It's such a good question, and it's 2 parts. It's making sure that the awards that we administer truly reach the people that need it, and making sure that from those awards that truly reach those, that information gets to the maps. Because the maps are crucial in terms of deciding where you could create a plan, where you could plan to serve in the future, right? It's the vision of what's possible. So we have a desktop review that right now uses NBAM as well as other mapping tools to identify whether or not the claimed service area is right. Then we allow internet service providers to challenge that. If they say, hey, actually, we serve that, and then we wade through their challenges to see if they're providing the data to back that up. And then if there's still a conflict, we'll go on the ground and prove it up. And then we send that information to NTIA for NBAM to continue to improve their mapping. To talk about the fabric and the FCC, I'll shift briefly over to Acting Administrator McLean.
Thank you. I personally encouraged the trade associations and our borrowers to engage with the FCC on their mapping process to make sure that the data is accurate. And we are moving in the FCC's mapping initiative to that, what they call the challenge portion, where there can be a dialogue back and forth between communities, service providers about where the service is to make that map as good as it can be. But again, at RUS, we look at the best information that's available, but then we go further by providing opportunities for service providers to comment. We validate those comments, and then, if necessary, we will send people to the field to look.
The gentleman from California, Mr. Panetta, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate this opportunity to talk about such an important area with such an educated and intelligent witness as the Undersecretary. Thank you very much for being here, Undersecretary, again, as well as appreciate your visit out to the district recently as well. Obviously, as you saw in my district on the Central Coast of California, access to reliable broadband internet is an absolute necessity for our students, for our farm workers, for our patients, for our businesses, especially in districts like mine, but also districts all across rural America. And I think, unfortunately, you've seen a lot of challenges. Now, fortunately, this Congress and your administration has begun to take action. The American Rescue Plan funded localities and local ISPs with projects for broadband in rural communities. We created the Emergency Broadband Benefit, now the Affordable Connectivity Program, to subsidize the cost of service for families. And most notably, we passed the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which is going to make a huge investment in broadband, including $42.5 billion just in broadband infrastructure. Now, there are issues, though, in getting that funding to rural communities, as you've heard about and as you know well about. And one of the main issues that really complicates things is that there are over a dozen federal definitions of rural. This becomes an issue when these definitions are also used to distribute these types of resources. As you heard my colleague, Ms. Schreier, talk about the Reconnect program as one of those programs that uses the rural definition to determine eligibility. But that's kind of difficult in districts like mine, because what we've seen is that none of those federal dollars that we continue to fight for gets down into our communities, especially my community, which, as you know, is a rural community. And that's got to change. And hopefully, looking ahead to the next Farm Bill, we can think carefully about standardizing eligibility for rural development programs in a way that's more inclusive for the needs of rural communities like yours and mine. There's obviously frustration, especially at the local level, because sometimes they're counted as rural, sometimes they're counted as non-rural. And the complexity of those definitions can lead to wasted time for our local leaders who are seeking very thoroughly in filling out the box, checking the boxes, filling out the applications, funds for these types of programs. What is the USDA doing to address this issue that is very frustrating for all of us at all levels? And what can Congress start to think about in looking at the 2023 Farm Bill to bring clarity to these types of issues when it comes to the definitions of rural?
It's such a good question, and one of my favorite parts of this job is getting to see the whole what rural looks like in different places all across the country, and it's very different. It's very diverse, and our regulations and statutes don't always acknowledge that diversity across rural America. As we have conversations about how we make it simpler to navigate, but also whether we change the rules of eligibility for what rural is, and we're happy to provide technical assistance with that, we've also got to recognize that changes in eligibility would also impact who's applying for the loans and grants, and that the vast majority of our programs are oversubscribed. So conversations about eligibility also mean who's competing for already limited funds. But it's a huge need, and we see it. I remember when I was a staffer for Senator Udall, and we were trying to help out a rural place, and we got this rubric of all of rural development's programs, and it's which one, are you rural in this one versus this one versus this one, right? And it can be hard, especially if you have a volunteer mayor or not the resources. So the other way we're trying to address this is through technical assistance and navigators. So I think we've got to have a dual approach here, which is, dancing with what we've got right now and making sure that we help navigate the complex programs, but then also trying to simplify them as much as possible.
And then in our role coming up here in the Farm Bill, is there, besides continuing these types of conversations, is there anything that we should be tracking in your expertise?
For that, the big thing is, as we consider eligibility, what does that mean for oversubscribed programs? In addition, I'll turn it over to Acting Administrator McLean if you have anything else to add.
Yeah, and I think what is rural is almost a metaphysical kind of question, because
Please don't respond that way to my local mayors.
But we look at the statutes that Congress enacts as resource allocation decisions, and they direct us in those population limits.
Unfortunately, the gentleman's time has expired. Now, the gentle lady from Minnesota, Ms. Fishback, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the opportunity, and thank you for being with us today, Madam Undersecretary. And I just got a question. The FEC recently rejected long-form applications for the biggest winners of the agency's recent RDOF program round. Numerous areas in my district held large tracts of census blocks that were initially approved for build-out under the RDOF program that were later rejected. But Todd County in my district in particular had broad swaths of area sectioned off for build out that many months later are now back to square one due to the recent announcement. Can you speak to the importance of properly vetting applicants to ensure that they can deliver on the promises that they make while applying for taxpayer funding?
Thank you so much, Congresswoman. And this is some of the timing challenges that we were talking about before in terms of coordination, but it also is an opportunity, right? Like, as you mentioned, we've got to make sure that the investments that we make truly can be delivered. And we've certainly seen that the RDOF awards from the previous administration, there's multiple steps, and that last step or the next step of being ready to authorize is a crucial one to make sure that a promise is truly deliverable in terms of the time frame that's allowed within the RDOF component. The way rural development does it is by being a reimbursement-based service. So as they are implementing, that's when they receive the award. And again, there's a balance there to make sure that it's as easy to administer as possible and as unburdensome as possible for the recipient. But that's how we currently navigate that, making sure that a recipient is able to deliver on their promises. We also have a 5-year build-out, which I think is a realistic build-out time that also recognizes the urgency of the situation.
And thank you for that answer. And for rural areas, including Todd County and many other counties in my area, this broadband development is necessary for the modernization and development of their community, and it helps bring family back to the areas. It helps attract businesses. It helps farm create efficiency in their operation, and it really helps spur infrastructure development. Broadband development, in essence, is about building strong rural communities. And I'm sorry about the buzzing. Can communities concurrently be eligible for USDA assistance under the Reconnect program while a long-form RDOF application is pending?
That is a really good question, and this is, again, the timing piece that we were talking about earlier. So recognizing that RDOF awards have multiple stages, including ready to authorize, and that's the step that we've paid the most attention to. The timing for the Reconnect Round 3 took some coordination in terms of figuring out how to disperse those awards. For Reconnect 4, we've been really clear. There's a lesson learned there, and specifically said if a project was not declared ready to authorize by a specific date, we would consider those areas. For any additional information, I'll give it to Acting Administrator McLean.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly the point, is where we draw the line, and we are drawing the line on the opening of the application window. If you're ready to authorize, you're taken care of by RDOF, but we don't want to pull all those territories off of the map for opportunities. We also make our applicants commit that if they're an RDOF recipient and an RUS recipient, that we don't pay for the same thing twice. We can level up those RDOF awards. And we work carefully, again, to deconflict. But I would encourage those communities to apply to Round 4 because I think it's an extraordinary opportunity.
All right. Well, thank you. And maybe we'll follow up with more specifics with you at a later time. But thank you both for your perspectives. And there are certainly information and lessons to be learned from that. So thank you very much. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chair.
The gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Bishop, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here today, Undersecretary, and for the department's recent investments in both rural health care as well as a new round for reconnected funding. We've heard of issues with the System for Management Award or the General Application Intake System. What improvements has the department made to streamline and improve the application intake and the review of applications to get resources to communities in a timely manner? I know that Ms. Pingree had asked about staffing needs earlier, and I think she was cut off in that answer, but if you could address that with also the additional resources, what changes have been made in personnel, presumably staffing, or what changes do you plan to make to address the increased workload? And finally, we've heard some aspects of the application process that can be burdensome. For example, the submission of all of the financial documents for very large providers, which overburdens them. What changes have been made, what changes are being considered to address these burdens or the issues that we've heard from our applicants?
Thank you so much, Congressman Bishop. It's wonderful to see you and really appreciate your in-depth questions. When it comes to the online platform, Reconnect was established in 2019, and we've created an online platform from there that continues to be improved. There were some bugs at certain points that we had to work through, and so we are working through that. In fact, we adjusted the schedule so that there would be reliability in terms of the application portal for this current round that is open. So we feel positive about where we are now. And in talking with recent applicants, we got good feedback on the maps that are integrated into the online portal. They said it was actually much easier than in previous rounds in terms of identifying where their proposed internet service area would be. So that we're making improvements, and there are still improvements to be made. Do you have anything you want to add in terms of the online portal?
No, I just want to say that this highlights where those administrative dollars have been so valuable to us, because we've been able to create the most modern IT systems with the Reconnect funding, and we walk through the applicants step by step, and it makes it difficult to proceed to the next step if you don't do the first step right. And so that reduces errors. And I'm very, very proud to report that between rounds 2 and rounds 3 of our Reconnect Awards, we experienced a 39% drop in review times and a 33% drop in failed or incomplete applications, in part because of that outreach that we've done and trying to create a system that prevents you from making mistakes and submitting an incomplete application. So we're making progress. We are learning, as the Undersecretary said, from each one of these experiences and trying to apply in each round's continuous process improvement.
Are you increasing your staffing?
Yes. So again, to the administrative funds that were included in the bipartisan infrastructure law, that made a huge difference because we were able to both bring on contractors immediately to help address some of the environmental review challenges and opportunities, and then also think longer term about how we bring people on. And being able to do both at the same time is really crucial. We have a large portion of our workforce, 38%, that's eligible to retire. And so we've got to think about succession plans. How do we make sure we're bringing people on who can learn from these experts in the field?
Let me ask you quickly, my time is expiring. What Congress can do, the Authorizing Committee and the Appropriations Committee, to help continue to improve the program moving forward?
Continued support of our robust staff in rural development that includes state and area offices, as well as the support in the national office and headquarters is crucial, and help in hiring issues.
Thank you very much for that succinct answer. My time has expired, and so I yield back, Mr. Chairman, 16 seconds.
The gentleman from Iowa, Mr. Finstra, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chairman Scott and Ranking Member Thompson and Undersecretary Torres Small. Thank you so much for your testimony. Thank you for being here again. I greatly appreciate it. I remember your comments the last time you were here, and I'm very grateful that you took the time out to be here again. I think just listening to your testimony and your questions and answers, you know, broadband is largely technical. I mean, there's a lot of technical issues that happen. There's also innovations that are happening in this technology space. My district is the second largest rural district in the country. It's very, very big, very vast, have a lot of small communities and so forth. And when you talked about telehealth, this is very critical. Also, precision farming is really gaining a lot of ground. So how do we look at the next farm bill, and what innovations can we do, or what you would say, hey, we should address as we move forward in this sector?
That's such a great question, because to me it speaks to the need to connect high-speed connectivity to the equipment that we use to leverage that. I'd also add that it's an opportunity to invest more in place-based work, because as we look at what are the unique factors of a rural place that make it the perfect place for precision ag, or the perfect place for this type of manufacturing that requires this connectivity, it needs to be based in the community where it exists. Yep. And so looking at place-based work requires strong technical assistance, requires strong presence in the field, and I think those are some of the opportunities we have to collaborate on in the future.
Do you see, as we move forward with the different grants that are out there, and we talked about a lot of them, Reconnect and stuff, that we should put a bigger or larger emphasis on, you talked about upload and download speeds earlier. Do you think that we should put more emphasis on that? Because we just see that's the future. My great fear is that we're putting things, whether it be fiber in the ground and stuff like that, that could be problematic. Could be, on upload and download speeds if we look 5 years out and stuff like that. What are your thoughts there?
Future proofing is really hard with an emerging technology, right? We've got to kind of guess where the puck is going. That is why we've been very intentional about the 100 up, 100 down symmetrical speed. But we also need to have an open dialogue about technologies and about speeds, necessary speeds. The thing that's helpful when it comes to, we're technology neutral, but when it comes to fiber specifically is that you can build upon it. Different technologies can often leverage on it, but we need to continue to have a dialogue there.
So just switching lanes just a little bit. So we have a land-grant university in my district, Iowa State University, that does great outreach, extension outreach and things like that. Is there an avenue that we could promote or push programs or the agenda through extension, through land-grant universities and things like that?
Absolutely. There's a few things that immediately come to mind in terms of the Swiss Army knife that is all the programs that rural development has. The Rural Innovation Stronger Economies program, I think, is a really exciting one for how we integrate education and workforce opportunities with outreach in a specific community. Also, I think in terms of working with land-grant institutions, I think there's always opportunities for them to participate in or to apply for community facilities grants and loans, for example, as well as the distance learning and telemedicine.
Yeah, I would agree. There's a lot of things that we can do there. I got one final question, and I'm not sure if you know this or not. So in March 20, obviously, we passed the Broadband Deployment Act, and there was obviously, we had to create the maps. You talked about the maps earlier. Do you have any sense of when those maps will be completed? There's a lot of discussion out there right now, and everybody's sort of like, I'd love to know the maps. And do you have any idea on that?
The information I have on it is that the window for when the ISPs had to provide information to the FCC ended earlier this month. I think September 2nd was the date, and we were helping push to get that done. The next phase is a really important phase where internet service providers can challenge that information so that we can ground truth it a bit. And then that's the information that I have in terms of where they're at.
Well, Undersecretary, I appreciate your time and thank you for your input. Very grateful. Thank you again. I yield back.
The gentlewoman from Iowa, Ms. Axney, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Deputy Undersecretary Torres Small. We're so thrilled to have you here, and thank you, Mr. McLean, for being here. Your work is greatly needed in states like Iowa. You just heard from my colleague, and of course, this is very important for our state, so thank you for all the work that you do. And Undersecretary, thanks for coming to Iowa. I know you know our state and how important it is to make sure that we've got that last mile connected. I've been working on this issue since I was in state government under 3 different governors, and we are trying to close in Iowa. So I'm going to ask you a little bit about the mapping, how we're working on that nationally, but also how we're coordinating with other states, because so many of our states have been working on these things for so long, but we seem to just have the little bits and pieces we can't figure out, and that's the part that really is where the rubber hits the road. So Representative Feenstra just brought up mapping, and I know we're making some progress there. You mentioned that because this week the FCC is finally taking challenges to the improved maps Congress asked them to do under the Broadband Data Act, and those maps should help. And the challenge process is key to getting community input on where they do and don't have service, of course. But one of the issues I've heard about is there's just a wide range of different maps that we're using for different programs. And I know those FCC maps aren't complete yet, but once those challenge processes are done that you just mentioned, how are you at the USDA planning to work with the FCC and the NTIA to make sure all these federal programs are aligned, that we're using the best possible information and we're working together to target that funding?
That's such a great question, and it's a challenge when it comes to the different maps and making sure that we're staying on track, that we're using the best thing we have right now as we try to create the next best thing. And that's part of what we're doing when it comes to rural development. Right now, we use NBAM, which provides a lot of information and incorporates a lot of information from state-based maps, for example, for that desktop review. But the way that we're also working to make it better is when we get better information from the challenge process that we have or the on-the-ground testing that we have, that goes back into that map to improve it for the future. We anticipate as FCC develops its map, recognizing that challenge process is really crucial, and there'll be information that's been gleaned from NBAM to inform that challenge process. That we'll continue to collaborate to provide more information to improve all of the mapping resources that we have. I'll go ahead and pass it to Acting Administrator McLean.
Yeah, thank you. Using all those different sources of information is really helpful because, and then the validation that we do, particularly necessary by sending staff out into the field. One thing about Iowa is they have a remarkable number of small independent telcos that have just done a tremendous job with long-time customers of their utility service, and it's just an honor to be able to.
Well, thank you for that, and I couldn't agree with you more because those telcos have done a great job, and my goodness, they are consistently upgrading services to ensure that their rural customers get exactly what other folks are getting. So I'm glad to hear this is being worked on. We absolutely need to make that happen. Let's move to the state. As you know, in Iowa, many other states, but we got $200 million of the American Rescue Plan to use that funding for broadband expansion in the state. The money's going out now. We're starting to work on that, right? I know the state's going to be getting even more money from the infrastructure law. So we've got funding. It's coming, and we're going to make this last step happen. In light of that, though, we talked about the federal coordination. What's happening to coordinate with the states and the telcos and everything that we've got in a great state like Iowa?
That coordination is crucial. I've been at a state broadband conversation in Alabama, talking to state legislators. We've been doing outreach specifically to state legislators as they think about how they create their programs, specifically talking about what Reconnect does so we can look at ways that they could complement it. One of the big things that they've talked about is middle mile because Reconnect doesn't specifically do that. We have learned, too, a state broadband agency contacted us, and the first time they contacted us, they had a little bit of trouble. Finally, we were connected thanks to Congress, to their representative, and through that, we realized, we also have to do outreach to broadband agencies, and so now we're doing trainings with broadband agencies. So it is a learning process, but it's gotten much better.
Yeah, thank you. And I would encourage the state agencies to use the data that we put out. We try to be as transparent as possible. All of our applications through the service area validation process are publicly available, so they're seen, they're open, and then all of our awards are well known. So that is contributing to that information. We would look forward to working with the states to make sure that we can coordinate our programs together.
Thank you.
The gentlelady from Florida, Ms. McCormick, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of our witnesses and the ranking member for hosting this very, very important hearing today. I feel like this is one of the areas where we can come together as Republicans and Democrats and really work to deploy this critical broadband across America. So I'll just jump right in onto a series of questions here. Madam Undersecretary, we've heard from numerous stakeholders about how difficult it is to provide broadband service to areas when mapping and data accuracy are inefficient and insufficient. As you know, USDA, FCC, and NTIA all do their own data mapping and do not necessarily follow the same collection methods. The same could be said for the states as well. Congress has passed legislation, including the Broadband Data Act, to help better simplify this information and require information sharing. How does RUS ensure that these communities are mapped correctly and that the data is integrated into the broader FCC maps?
Thank you very much for that question. We are a ready helper in this work. So although we have a separate process for validating our awards to ensure that for our mandate that area of service can truly connect to each address within them, we also are working to make sure that we're getting that information to NTIA and FCC. One of the ways that we're doing that is we have the desktop review of NBAM, and as we get information about the accuracy of that, we send it back directly to them. So it's real-time updates. We're also working hard to make sure that the service providers are helping strengthen those maps too. So for the FCC map, that's the fulfillment of the legislation you mentioned, we were out on the road, the acting administrator and I, reaching out to all of our contacts, all of the ISPs, saying, don't forget the deadline's coming up. And now that we're in that challenge part of the phase, that's crucial because that's how you ground truth, those claims about service. And so we're getting out the word again about the importance of making those challenges. So we'll continue to work carefully and continue to provide feedback about what we're seeing on the ground to strengthen mapping writ large.
And as a follow-up to that, the state of Florida, for example, has their own mapping initiative underway. How is the federal government working to pair up and match up with these maps that the states are producing as well as private providers? And what are some of the other issues that you may have or concerns or challenges in linking the USDA broadband programs with other agencies like FCC and NTIA and these state maps? And how is this slowing down the USDA's current process in administering broadband funding?
So I don't want to overstep our role at rural development when it comes to the inputs for the maps, but we will. I will state that the work, for example, that's happened in Georgia for mapping that's really showed a great improvement in terms of knowing what's on the ground has helped inform the federal work that's being done now for mapping. When it comes to rural development specifically, I think we've been able to leverage the multiple types of information that we have really well because we have that desktop review that utilizes all of that information, but we also just don't take that for granted. We allow folks to challenge it, and then if it's necessary, we ground truth it as well. That can be a long process. So I suppose in the future, if information was perfect, we could shorten that process. But until then, it's really important. And frankly, we don't always ground truth if we can resolve the information from the get-go, and that's allowed us to be more efficient. But that being said, our priority is having that right information. And so when there is a conflict, we spend that extra time to make sure we're delivering the money as efficiently as possible.
So to that point, and this will be my final follow-up because I'm running short on time, I hear continuously from various stakeholders, and we've heard in past hearings that the lengthy process, the approval process for broadband loan applicants, it's too long. So how long is it taking on average for broadband funding to get out the door once the application window closes? And what can we do to expedite those funds getting out the door?
This is the balance that we've been talking about. So we have a 5-year build out, and that's the main, just to answer your question quickly, the main thing is that Reconnect has a 5-year build out, but we reimburse for expenses, so that can.
Yeah, if you can follow up, that's a good question with Ms. Kamick in writing. And now the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. O'Halloran, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman and Ranking Member Scott Thompson. For hosting today's hearing on rural broadband. I want to also thank the Undersecretary Torres Small and the witnesses for being here today. First, I would like to start off by giving special thanks to the Undersecretary for her recent visit out to the district. We really enjoyed having you out there. I'm glad we share the same goal of 100% connectivity that all Americans, no matter their zip code, deserve high quality and reliable broadband. Connectivity ensures access to essential services, making it easier for patients to receive the care they need, students to participate in online learning, and small businesses to compete in the increasingly digital and global marketplace. Broadband is essential for rural communities to thrive in the modern economy, which is why it's so urgent that we bring broadband to the hardest to research in underserved areas. And Reconnect has been a successful program, and we look forward to more of that. I want to go back, though, to some of the issues. We've been working on mapping now, went through the whole process of getting it moving along a few years ago, and now we're at a point in time when the last number of members have identified mapping as a continuing issue. I'm very concerned that we have an enforcement mechanism to not go back to the times when we didn't have mapping kept up to date. I also have a big concern that the agencies and how they're coordinating this process are going to do that. And the ground truthing piece of this, we can't move ahead unless we have enough availability to go out into that field and identify clearly that this is what's happening and enforce the companies to be able to do this in an appropriate way so we don't go through this time and time and time again. So, Undersecretary, could you comment on that, please?
Thank you so much, Congressman. It's a pleasure to see you, and thank you for your advocacy for underserved areas. You represent some of the most rural places in the country, and I know that ground truthing is exceptionally important in the places that you serve. That's why rural development's field structure is so crucial. I love how many times we said GFR, or General Field Representative, in this meeting, because they're the folks who are making sure that the maps are accurate and that we're truly reaching the people who don't have access to high-speed internet right now, the people in the farthest flung places across our country. So continuing to invest in that structure is crucial. The administrative funds as part of the bipartisan infrastructure law was crucial for that. And it provides that accountability piece that you mentioned, Congressman, about making sure that the maps continue to be updated and are reflecting the reality on the ground.
Thank you, Undersecretary. Follow up to that. We know that it didn't work in the past. What have we learned from that? And do you have the personnel to be able to address these issues and the coordination with the FCC and others to be able to overcome the mistakes of the past?
I think we've all learned that census blocks aren't the accurate description of the reality, and so having people on the ground being able to verify when necessary is really valuable. Staffing continues to be a challenge for rural development, both in terms of the hiring process, in terms of the funding for staffing, and then also in terms of finding qualified people. Now that there's so many people working in high-speed internet, it's a competitive field, and so that's a challenge as well. So those are the lessons that we're learning and the challenges that we're trying to navigate to continue to be better at reaching the hardest to reach places.
Thank you very much. I also want to emphasize the importance of outreach to our local communities. You mentioned that a little bit, and I know you've stressed that time and time again. That's why you've been out in the field so much. But the underlying aspects of this are real. And people right now, I think, as Congress, should be able to be out there all the time, making sure we are educating the public as much as possible. But what type of programs can we anticipate on a large scale for the public to be able to understand not only the programs, but the timing mechanisms and all the other planning that's going to go into that?
The outreach is crucial. That's why President Biden's Rural Partners Network, I think, is really exciting, focusing efforts in places that need it most.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield.
Could you please respond in writing? Gentleman's time is up, and we have a hard stop with votes coming. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Lawson, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and for you and the Ranking Member Thompson for having this meeting. Undersecretary Torres Small for joining us today. I appreciate your staff working diligently with our office on a number of rural development projects, and I look forward to hosting you in the district real soon. Undersecretary, on September the 6th, the window for the fourth round of Reconnect funding opened for grant applications submitted until November the 2nd. Once this round of Reconnect funding closed, how long do you expect it to take for USDA to review and then award grant funding for applications?
Thank you so much for that question and for your advocacy for rural America. I really appreciate the chance to get to work with you. When it comes to the awards process for Reconnect, we're making great strides in terms of getting awards out as quickly as possible. And you can look at Reconnect 3 as an example of that, where we're releasing awards on a rolling basis as quickly as we can so that projects can start running. And that's why we're releasing that information in tranches. It's also, we've been able to get out money quicker because we intend to make awards with the bipartisan infrastructure law through Reconnect this year, so this fall, which is very exciting. When it comes to Reconnect Round 4, we anticipate having that same track of releasing those awards as soon as we have. Now, we've spent a lot of time talking about this three-step process where we have the desktop review of an area in terms of eligibility, then it's the challenge process, and then, if necessary, the ground truthing. That does take some time, and that's why being able to announce projects on a rolling basis is a helpful way to let folks know as quickly as possible when an award's been made. Acting Administrator McLean, do you want to add anything to that?
Yes, thank you. And of course, to be very honest, we'll know once we get the application window closed as how many applications we receive, because that's a big driver of how long it takes to be able to go through the applications. As the Undersecretary mentioned earlier, Round 3 of Reconnect attracted more applications than Round 1 and Round 2 combined. And so it was a big task, but yet we were able to accelerate our record of approval and our pace of approval, and we look forward to replicating that for Round 4.
You know, that is really great news when you talk about Round 3, what is really happening. So that means the word is getting out. And so I think that my next question would be with over a dozen agencies in the program charged with broadband development and interagency communication is essential. How the USDA, what are they doing to enhance communication and coordination among these different programs and agencies?
Coordination with this many agencies and this level of unprecedented investment just has to be a way of life. And so that means reflecting on those MOUs and making sure they're integrated into all of the work that we do, whether that's talking about timing for getting out our programs, whether that's navigating awards and service areas, or whether that's navigating how we do technical assistance, for example, with NTIA's upcoming investment in technical assistance. It's also a chance to learn from each other, and that's what we're learning on the ground as well, using each other's networks to reach new partners and also each other's expertise to better administer our programs.
Okay, my colleagues, Mr. O'Halloran was talking about some of the mapping, and so I just wanted to say, how will USDA Rural Development use the new maps to better allocate federal funds in order to limit overbilling and ensure connectivity for all rural residents?
For that, I'll allow my acting administrator to.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. I think our highest priority is to, and our scoring matrix focuses our resources on those areas that need it the most. And that is where we're putting a great deal of energy and outreach. And I think that this round of funding has some of the most advantageous scoring criteria for underserved areas, and we're looking forward to a robust response in Round 4.
Okay, thank you very much. Great to see you guys again. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. And Undersecretary Torres Smalls, thank you. And Administrator McLean, thank you. And for joining us today and Having concluded all our questions for the panel, you are now excused. And the committee will take a brief 2-minute recess here to allow our first panel to leave and our second panel of witnesses to take their seats. Thank you. The committee will come to order, and without objection, question time for members for our second round will be 3 minutes to allow us to get to as many members as possible before votes are called. We have a hard stop when votes are called and on the floor, and we appreciate your cooperation. Let me introduce our first witness for our second panel. And this is Miss B. Lynn Follins B. I got that right, thank you. Who is the Vice President of Strategic Initiatives Partnership for U.S. Telecom. And our second witness is the Honorable Terrell Clark, who is the first District Commissioner in Stearns County, Minnesota. And she is testifying today on behalf of the National Association of Counties. And our third, Hawkins, who is the president of the Missouri Farm Bureau, and is testifying on behalf of the American Farm Bureau Federation. Welcome to all of our witnesses, and you will each be recognized for your 5 minutes, and the timer should be visible to you. Once the yellow button comes on, that's caution. You will have a minute left, and we'll count down from the 5 minutes, 3 minutes, at which point your time will have expired. So let us get started. Ms. Follins B., please begin when you're ready.
Chairman Scott, Ranking Member Thompson, and other distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Lynn Follensby, and I am Vice President of Strategic Initiatives and Partnerships for U.S. Telecom, the national trade association representing network providers, innovators, suppliers, and manufacturers committed to connecting the world through the power of broadband. Our diverse membership ranges from large publicly traded corporations to local, regional companies and cooperatives. The COVID-19 pandemic clearly illustrated that high-speed broadband is the cornerstone of American life, connecting people to education, healthcare, employment, and virtually every aspect of our daily lives, while also ensuring our nation's economic security. U.S. Telecom members actively participate in all federal programs that support the deployment of broadband, including the Rural Utility Services Reconnect program. We applaud the committee for holding today's hearing. This is an important discussion as we look closely to how items adopted as part of the 2018 Farm Bill have impacted the deployment of rural broadband. It is also important to review how the U.S. Department of Agriculture works with other federal agencies towards achieving one of our nation's top priorities, closing the digital divide. In order to do this, interagency coordination among all federal agencies that touch the broadband space is an absolute necessity. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act programs provide a significant amount of money for broadband deployment, and there is a clear need for close coordination across all agencies involved. U.S. Telecom recommends that policymakers require early reporting by states that administer broadband funding programs, particularly those funded by NTIA, and that data should be included in the FCC's broadband data collection maps. Similarly, agencies such as RUS should be sharing with the FCC their data about where they have provided grants and loans so that all agencies have complete information about all currently funded broadband projects, whether completed or not, in order to avoid duplication and avoid government waste. USDA and other agencies must also align on the current definition of broadband. Having different deployment programs utilizing different speed minimums creates an inconsistent standard for broadband deployment. In this same vein, USDA must work directly with all federal agencies to ensure consistent requirements related to supply chain, including the application of Buy America requirements. In addition to coordinating with other agencies, there are improvements RUS should be making to its Reconnect program to create clearer processes so there's greater transparency. Despite some changes, there also continue to be rules in place that limit participation by some applicants. U.S. Telecom urges RUS to consider alternatives to its current rules on liens affecting collateral. Aligning with other federal broadband programs and requiring a letter of credit would enable more carriers to participate, particularly larger companies who serve the most rural and remote customers in the nation. Although the Reconnect program has admittedly evolved and had multiple successful rounds of its grant program, curiously, the Reconnect program is still operating as a pilot program. In the upcoming Farm Bill, Congress should consider whether it intends to formalize the program, and if so, consider the program's current role in conjunction with available funds at other agencies. I also have the privilege of serving as the vice chair of the mapping working group for the FCC's Precision Ag Task Force, which provides advice and recommendations to the FCC and USDA on how to assess and advance deployment of broadband on unserved and underserved agricultural lands. The task force working groups have done extensive research and developed recommendations that address current challenges. I applaud this committee for its role in the creation of the Precision Ag Task Force as part of the 2018 Farm Bill. The task force is in its second two-year term and has already made some excellent recommendations which will no doubt have an impact on the advancement of precision ag. Key recommendations adopted thus far include combining the FCC's broadband data collection effort with NASS, or the National Agricultural Statistical Service, cultivated land data, so farmers can know where there's both fixed and mobile providers serving the ag and rural domains, including Native American ag lands. Increase incentives and subsidies at the local and national level to substantially increase connectivity, enhance both download and upload high-speed standards to meet the applications used in precision ag, improve collaboration between federal agencies and remove regulatory barriers and align their existing and individual file management, increase digital access to education and training for individuals engaged in farming, and place a priority on developing precision ag cybersecurity. These thoughtful and detailed recommendations reflect only a sliver of the hard work volunteer members of the task force are doing on a weekly basis. U.S. Telecom and our members stand ready to work with the committee, Congress, and the administration to connect all communities once and for all and close the digital divide.
Thank you very much, Ms. Follansbee. And now, Commissioner Clark, please begin when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member Thompson and distinguished members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to testify today. My name is Terrell Clark, and I serve as 1st District County Commissioner for Stearns County, Minnesota. I'm also representing the National Association of Counties in my role as the chair of the Telecommunications and Technology Committee. Counties play a major role in broadband deployment efforts within our communities, especially those in rural regions. We serve key roles as partners, funders, policymakers, data aggregators, and conveners for promoting high-speed internet access and broadband deployment across our communities. The lack of reliable broadband in our rural communities is a major economic barrier and an issue of socioeconomic equality. Without access to high-speed internet, many of our rural and underserved communities are becoming increasingly isolated and left behind. For those in small communities, broadband can serve as a lifeline, connecting students to their homework, as well as to gaining degrees, connecting sick patients to medical consultation, locally unavailable, and having important business opportunities, including precision agriculture. I'm here today to underscore the central role that counties play in broadband deployment and accessibility efforts, and how a strong intergovernmental partnership and collaboration will help us continue to work together to close the digital divide. As we've witnessed, COVID-19 exacerbated the already dire digital divide in rural America. We urge Congress to continue to fund broadband deployment geared specifically to rural communities. To be clear, we have seen great progress so far. Counties applaud the efforts in the American Rescue Plan Act to fund the deployment of high-speed internet access across the country. We also appreciate and continue to engage with the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Reconnect program, whose goal is to target much-needed broadband access to rural communities. These historic and federal investments show the need for federal support in broadband investments to our unconnected and rural communities continues to be a top priority for America's counties. Beyond ARPA, the bipartisan infrastructure law also is offering vital resources to ensure access to high-speed internet to local governments. However, a continued focus on broadband infrastructure grants programs that are accessible, flexible, and respectful of the local decision-making authority is needed to connect rural America. Given the elevated federal law role in broadband deployment efforts, counties appreciate the increased coordination and collaboration across multiple federal agencies. As we review the progress we've made so far and keep an eye on the future, we believe the following principles can help to continue to steward broadband deployment efforts across the country. First, streamline the grant application process, which is especially crucial for rural counties that may not have the personnel or fiscal resources when applying for grants that support broadband deployment. Second, programs should support broadband investments that prioritize high-speed internet that will provide dependable internet access for the long run. High-speed internet access continues to constitute a character providing reliable, affordable, and accessible service for our rural communities to benefit the most. Third, prioritize communities with no access to infrastructure, which includes areas that have yet to receive final approval for federal funding in regards to building a viable broadband network in order to continue to proactively address the lack of connectivity in rural America. Finally, leverage local expertise and resources, which offer an unparalleled level of knowledge when setting requirements and parameters in federal programs. This includes quantitative and qualitative data, mapping efforts, and community testimony. We urge our federal partners to consider and value these resources for assisting in determining the level of need for our rural communities. Moving forward, we want to ensure we meet our collective goal of 100% connectivity across rural America, which is not only vital to the success of these communities, but also our nation. A strong federal, state, local partnership is needed. We believe in consultation with counties, the 2023 Farm Bill provides a unique opportunity to further address the dire connectivity needs of our nation's rural counties to ensure they are resilient and future-ready communities. We appreciate your attention. I want to thank you again for this invitation and look forward to working together to close the digital divide faster and more efficiently.
And thank you, Commissioner Clark. And now, Mr. Hawkins, please begin when you're ready.
Good afternoon, Chairman Scott, Ranking Member Thompson, and members of the committee. My name is Garrett Hawkins. I'm a fifth-generation farmer and a cattleman from Appleton City, Missouri, which is about an hour and a half south of Kansas City. Agriculture runs deep in my family's roots as our extended family raises everything from livestock to row crops to dairy production. I'm also a husband and father, and I'm proud to serve as the president of the Missouri Farm Bureau, and certainly appreciate the opportunity to provide input on rural broadband deployment across rural America. You know, deployment of this technology is critical for stimulating and revitalizing the rural economy. It's essential to modern agriculture, to the farmers and ranchers who grow our food, and for the quality of life for rural Americans. I see the need for broadband every day in rural communities as I travel all across the state. One family I was with the other night shared with me that they live just 1 mile past the city limit of a very urban area here in Missouri and still don't have access to high-speed internet. Other families I know use the technology not just for precision agriculture, but for basic online marketing as well as education. I recently visited with another fellow farmer from southern Missouri who was thrilled to see fiber optic line being run just a few miles from his farm. Maybe, he said, they'll come my way in a year or so. In Missouri, we've taken action to bring more broadband to rural communities. In 2017, Farm Bureau convened the Missouri Broadband Working Group. This group was comprised of over 120 stakeholders from all industries that formed recommendations that were taken to our governor and congressional delegation. As a result, our governor established the Office of Broadband within our Department of Economic Development. This happened because of collaboration. In addition, we've advocated for the Missouri Broadband Grant Program, which provides financial assistance to providers who are seeking to deploy broadband in underserved and underserved areas. Over the years, the program has grown, and Missouri recently approved a $265 million investment into the grant program via our state share of the American Rescue Plan Act funds. Although we've made significant strides, the work is far from finished. Our state is already laying the groundwork for a successful rollout of the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, which was passed as a part of the IIJA. As an organization, we continue to advocate that our state direct adequate funding for the deployment of broadband to our unserved ag areas. Knowing where adequate services exist is critical to crafting sound policies related to deployment. Missouri's Office of Broadband will be addressing this challenge head-on by allocating our federal dollars for a statewide mapping initiative. I also have the privilege of serving on the FCC's Precision Agriculture Connectivity Task Force. You know, today's farmers and ranchers, we use precision ag techniques to make decisions that impact everything from fertilizer to the amount of water that's needed for our crops to the amount and type of herbicides that are applied. These are just a few examples of how farmers are using connectivity to bump yield, improve environmental impact, and increase profitability. Beyond specific on-farm needs, rural communities need access for healthcare, government services, education, and business opportunities. The upcoming Farm Bill is an important opportunity for this committee to continue the work that USDA is already doing in the broadband space, including but not limited to the Reconnect program. In fact, the reason why I'm not in Washington, D.C. today is because our friends at Rural Development are hosting a Reconnect workshop here in the Farm Bureau building in Jefferson City. In the 2018 Farm Bill, Congresswoman Hartzler worked with us to pass an amendment to set the minimum build-out speed for USDA-funded broadband programs. We appreciate the committee's work as well to better direct coordination and interoperability among programs administered by USDA, the FCC, and NTIA. And we want this cooperation to continue moving forward. As more precision equipment becomes available, we must make sure that we are prioritizing the build out of projects that will take us into the future. Truly, that's what this really needs to be about, is building a network, a system that will be future-proof for those of us in agriculture and rural America. Farm Bureau appreciates the committee's interest in rural broadband. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify on this important issue on behalf of our farmers and ranchers, and I look forward to your questions.
And thank you very much. And to each of our very distinguished three witnesses, we want to thank you for your excellent testimony. At this time, members will be recognized for questions in order of seniority, alternating between the majority and minority side. You will be recognized for 3 minutes each in order to allow us to get in as many questions as possible before votes are called on the floor. And also, as a reminder, our members, please keep your microphones muted until you are recognized in order to minimize background noise. And now I recognize myself to start with 3 minutes. And Ms. Falansby and Commissioner Clark, as you well know, our 2018 Farm Bill established the FCC Precision Agriculture Task Force, of which you both are members, and the task force adopted a series of recommendations, including improving federal broadband maps, interagency collaboration, and prioritizing development of precision agriculture, cybersecurity specialists at USDA, among many others. And following the task force adoption of this report and its recommendations, let me ask you, have you all received any updates of the status of those recommendations, and have the agencies been working to implement those recommendations?
I'll go first. Thank you very
please.
much, Congressman, for your question. As a current member of the task force, I can't speak for the FCC and USDA on their behalf, but I can let you know that the task force is ongoing, and it is actively working on a weekly basis. There are groups meeting weekly to work on additional recommendations and encourage further development of ideas that can improve precision agriculture.
Okay, and Commissioner Clark, I believe, next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would have to second what Ms. Falansby just said in terms of the committee, but as it relates to the work we're doing at NACO, each of those in the groups that you've referenced have been working with us, and we appreciate that ongoing commitment to doing so.
Very good, because we have so many agencies involved, and this is the greatest part of our challenge. If we're able to keep our agencies working in collaboration with each other, it's going to smooth this process. And so I'm glad to hear that you all have received an update on it and that you're working to improve those areas. And I see that my time is rapidly spoken. And so now I recognize the gentlewoman from North Carolina, Ms. Adams, who is also the vice chair of our Committee on Agriculture. You're recognized for 5 minutes. 3 minutes, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, again for hosting this hearing, and to our witnesses, thank you for your testimony, Ms. Clark. In your testimony, you discussed how COVID-19 exacerbated the digital divide, particularly as it pertains to the homework gap. As an educator for over 40 years and a member of the Ed and Labor Committee, I am committed to ensuring that each and every student can access the internet at home so we can close this homework gap once and for all. So Ms. Clark, can you discuss the role that local governments play in deploying high-speed internet and what a more robust federal, state, local framework might look like?
Mr. Chair and Congresswoman Adams, thank you for your commitment and your work on that. Certainly as a mom and now a grandmother, I very much appreciate those efforts. This has been a really critical area. We saw it in particular in rural communities, but we also saw it in historically underserved urban areas as well. So most counties, many counties across the country have utilized, whether it was CARES Act or ARPA funds, have worked with school districts to try to help with making sure that they have the tools for the students to be able to do the homework the way they need to. And while they've been doing remote learning, to do that as well. Unfortunately, because so many areas still don't have sufficient broadband, it can be really hard. Like I was thinking about one of my county's childcare providers who's got kids of her own, and they have an egg business as well, and they just can't get enough speed to be able to have everybody doing it at the same time. Or in my district, where we have a large number of immigrants and refugees, if you've got several kids that are trying to do homework at the same time, you need a high enough speed. So counties right now across the country are partnering with those districts and utilizing and trying to leverage resources so that we can get that high speed, affordable internet to as many of our school kids as quickly as possible. But your help, continued help is needed on that front. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much. That you actually answered my second question I had for you in terms of any roadblocks you may have. Mr. Hawkins, can you do you have any information on about why we need to ensure that all farmers can make use of the precise technologies? I only have a few seconds.
For us to compete in today's global marketplace, we need access to technology. And truly, as I think about how to bring the kids home to the farm, Congresswoman, technology is the key. Technology is key to opening up more markets on the farm, better access to technology. But clearly in our rural communities, I can't bring my kids home if the community has died around us. And so truly broadband is that thread of life through the community out to the farm.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. And now the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Baird, is recognized for 5 minutes. 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member. I really appreciate the opportunity to visit with these witnesses today, and I really appreciate their expertise. Mr. Hawkins, I really appreciate your interest in cattle and being a farmer, and then I think you really touched on something that's important. The only way we're going to get these young people back to the farm is if we've got high-speed internet and the technology so they can get on the phone or whatever they need to do. But in that vein, I wanted to ask you what you thought about what the upload speeds or what those speeds need to be for an average family in rural America. And does this need to change for farmers utilizing precision agriculture? So just a quick idea of what your thoughts are for download, upload speeds.
Well, thank you for the question, Congressman. You know, it's hard to wrap your arms around what is the ideal speed. What we continue to say is that the bandwidth has to be reliable and robust from the standpoint of being future-proof. You know, in agriculture, as we look at the incorporation of precision technology, you know, we need the ability to upload massive amounts of data in very rapid fashion. You know, just the other day at our agritourism conference here in Missouri, a young farmer displayed a drone and how he uses the drone to map his agritourism operation, as well as to use it for chemical application to control weeds as well as pests. And again, as he thinks about cameras and his ability to scan and monitor the farm, you got to be able for that data to be able to transfer quickly, especially when we're working with third partners. I'd also say anecdotally, you know, I'm looking at exploring and using a new innovative forage technology on the farm, that one of the keys will be that I have connectivity in a robust fashion so that the company that's providing this forage technology can monitor to make sure the equipment is working effectively. And so truly, you know, the farm of the future has to be connected, and truly the future is now, sir. So truly, you know, at least 100 is what we say, megabit per second is truly what we need to be shooting for. My rural hospital says the same thing, that they need 100 up, 100 down in order to do telemedicine in a way that is truly a good experience for the provider as well as the patient.
Thank you for that insight. And Terrell, I see you nodding your head, but we're about out of time. So I assume that means you think that's the appropriate speeds too. I got to tell you that at one time in my life, I was a county commissioner as well, and I enjoyed that time very much. Appreciate what you're doing. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentlewoman from Ohio, Ms. Brown, is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Scott, for holding this incredibly important hearing on the future of broadband. While access to reliable and affordable broadband internet has long been the standard for many across the U.S., there are still millions of people, including my constituents in Ohio, who continue to struggle with unreliable connections and unaffordable rates. As workplaces and classrooms migrated online during the pandemic, the digital divide became apparent. Congress that included broadband funding to address the digital divide. The broadband appropriations in the bipartisan infrastructure law are one of the largest federal broadband investments in history, and I look forward to building on our success. So my question is for Ms. Follansbee. In your testimony, you spoke to the value of factoring in user experience as we work to bring broadband access to all corners of the country. Can you explain why that is important for policymakers and those administering these programs to consider?
Yes, thank you, Congresswoman, for your question. The user experience is essentially the customer experience, right? And we're trying to close the digital divide. We are attempting to make sure that everybody has the same type of service in the sense that folks have access to education, they have access to telehealth, they have access to precision ag applications. All of that's important. So we need to ensure that all of the country has at least some broadband and focus on the need to future-proof that network so that going forward, the speeds can build. It's a scalable situation. Our members are building a lot of fiber with the BEAD money that's coming through NTIA, and we believe that will bode well for the future.
Thank you for your answer. Commissioner Clark, as a former county council member myself, I know the important role that the county governing bodies play in the success of programs like these, especially where there are smaller municipalities within their jurisdiction. Can you speak to the partnership between county governments and USDA and other agencies? And are there areas for improvement?
Thank you so much. Yes, actually, the FCC, USDA, NTIA, and others have been coming and working with us both to help with the educational process, but listening to the barriers, a number of which members had talked about today. You brought up some of our most rural areas as well, and I can tell you, using my county as an example, we have almost all of our townships are also leveraging their ARPA funds with ours, while we then also try to go apply for state and federal funds to keep growing it so we can get all those areas covered. So really that local, state, federal components are just critical, and we just need to keep working at it.
Thank you.
I see my time has expired. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. And now the gentleman from Pennsylvania, our distinguished ranking member, Thompson, is recognized for 3 minutes.
Well, Chairman, thank you so much. My apologies, I had to step out of the hearing room, but my appreciation to this second panel for their local service and everything that they do, especially in the space of bridging the digital divide. So I have a question for Mr. Hawkins. As you may know, last July, this committee passed unanimously H.R. 4374, the Broadband Internet Connections for Rural America Act, which consolidates the Reconnect program and the 2018 Farm Bill rural broadband programs. As we approach the next Farm Bill, how can we make these rural broadband programs more efficient and more effective for rural America?
Well, thank you, Ranking Member Thompson, for the question and your continued leadership in this space, along with the committee. A couple of thoughts. Something that we would love to see more of in Missouri is more cooperation across territories to make sure that service is getting provided. And maybe in some cases, it may be a rural electric co-op that then works with an investor-owned utility where their service areas butt up against each other, and maybe the co-op is providing broadband, but the IOU has no interest in it. We want to see incentives for out-of-the-box thinking and cooperation to make sure that these dollars are stretched as far as they can and that service is provided in an efficient manner. So let's be creative. And then I'd also say, an experience or a concern that we've had is the accountability on the backside. Once awards are made, making sure that those providers who are receiving these dollars are held accountable to provide the service that they said they're going to provide and do it in a timely fashion. So we've communicated, for instance, to the FCC that when a provider doesn't follow through, that maybe they need a second in line approach, that whoever was next in line that had the second best application, maybe those dollars should go there. Or if a state has shown leadership and established an Office of Broadband and has processes in place to handle those dollars, maybe those dollars should be given to that state to then allocate to make sure that those unmet needs are taken care of. But certainly, those are a couple of items that I would consider and hope you consider during the next Farm Bill.
Very good. Well, I just encourage any of our witnesses that would want to weigh in writing. Obviously, the Reconnect program is still operating as a pilot, and would love to hear from you why it's important for USDA's broadband programs to be statutorily authorized, the importance of that certainty going forward. But that, in the consideration of time, I will ask a reply from that, a future reply, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member. And now the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Lawson, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You said 5, or are you saying 3?
I'm saying 3.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. You know, in my home state of Florida, 96% of the population has access to broadband, and only about 7-8% of Floridians in the rural areas have that access. The numbers are even lower in the rural counties in North Florida. In Gaston County, my home county, was only about 13% of the residents have broadband, while 89% of the households could receive it. The question is to the member, when Congress is considering broadband funding legislation for counties like Gaston, why is it necessary that Congress not only fund projects that expand connectivity and infrastructure for broadband, but also fund projects that address affordability barriers of residents? And that's for the whole panel.
Oh, I'll start. Thank you, Congressman, for your question. Yeah, there's several pieces to the deployment of broadband. There's access, which is what you're talking about, the initial ability to get broadband. And then there's affordability, and there's also something called adoption, which is getting folks to sign up for it. Fortunately, in the IIJA, there are funds to not only increase deployment, but also they created the Affordable Connectivity Program, which has been very successful in expanding the ability of folks with low incomes to be able to afford their broadband service. And adoption also is part of the program and will require additional work, but I think all 3 of those things have been addressed, and we look forward to seeing the programs implemented to achieve those goals.
Did anyone else want to speak to it?
Sure, Mr. Chair and Congressman. This is a really big issue. The ACP is going to be a big help. We're working, actually, on bringing providers who are going to receive funds through our county, making sure that they are having that program available to residents. But in addition, we're finding a fair amount of rural areas that are experiencing something that one of our Stearns County's residents talked about, which is, I'm now paying for satellite. It's $120 a month. They say it's unlimited, and yet we start getting metered and shut down, and my child can't even get homework, and I can't run my business. We're hearing these kinds of stories around the country, so that affordability piece needs to be actually available to folks. So we want to keep working to have the ACP available throughout the country and for it to be real for all of our residents.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do I still have a minute?
No, I'm afraid we're out. Thank you, Mr. Lawson. And now, yes, and now the gentle lady from Minnesota, Miss Fishback, is recognized for 5 minutes. 3 minutes.
3 minutes. I'll have to talk quick. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, you know what? Then I will go first to Commissioner Clark, who actually I was honored to serve with in the Minnesota Senate. So And I will resist calling you Senator Clark, but Commissioner Clark, you mentioned in your written testimony Minnesota's border-to-border grant program, which continues to be widely popular among providers and local governments. And you and I have both worked on this program, I'm sure, in our time in the Senate for both state and local governments. But what lessons can we learn from this program, and what can we bring to the next Farm Bill reauthorization?
Thank you, Congresswoman, for that question and for your work. It is an easier program for our internet service providers to apply for. It has been an easier program for counties and other local governments to also approach. So streamlining processes is part of that, making it easier, particularly you brought up Todd County earlier, for our smaller counties to actually be able to get in the door and have an opportunity to receive these funds. One of the approaches that we think is important would be to have kind of a single entry point instead of trying to figure out which place to go to federally for which program. Streamline the application, make it so you can come in a portal and you really can be able to access the funds that meet your county's needs, so that a county like Todd, who is really unserved, can actually deal with that, right? So the border-to-border program, what we're hearing from smaller internet providers is that actually is a pretty doable program to approach. Let's make that happen on the federal level too.
Thank you very much. And maybe if any of the other panelists would want to just add, I've got a minute left if anybody wants to add to that, those thoughts. All right, I don't hear anyone. So, Mr. Chair, I will yield back my 49 seconds. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Ms. Flores is recognized for 3 minutes if she's connected. We've been able to get her connected? She's working on it. Oh, okay. Ms. Flores, are you able to get connected? Okay, if she does, you can interrupt me on my closing. She can submit questions. And you can also, Ms. Flores, submit your questions in writing, and we'll make sure we get to you. I really appreciate everybody's cooperation here. We have votes pending. I appreciate everybody cooperating us with the shortened time, and we appreciate our witnesses taking the time to really give us some valuable information. And thanks once again. And but before we adjourn and I give my opening statement, good to have you back here.
Good.
In person. The ranking member got here in person.
Good to be out of the virtual world and back in the real world.
So please.
Well, Chairman, thank you so much once again for your overall partnership as we advance the issues facing rural America, or as I like to say, essential America, and specifically on the topic of broadband. I thought we had great witnesses today. I was very disappointed with the first panel, once again, that NTIA and the FCC were so disrespectful to the people of rural America, where they did not accept the invitation to testify today, since they have a significant outreach. But I think we heard a lot of good things. I think it reaffirmed the great work that we, as a full committee, unified, had done. In terms of, we heard about the need for a circuit rider position. We heard about mapping issues, and certainly within the bill that we advanced, there was some grant funding specifically to allow local entities to determine where the gaps were in the digital divide. So it just reaffirmed, I think, the work that this committee is doing in the space of rural broadband, that we're right on target. Yes, and that's much appreciated. Really encouraging USDA and Rural Utility Service, who unfortunately has been allocated to a partnership role, but it looks like a minor role, certainly from a dollar. When you look at 65 billion or what it was, and USDA gets 2 billion of those dollars, I think that it demands that we as a committee have a strong oversight role that we need to exercise in terms of bridging the digital divide in essential or rural America. And that these partners, the witnesses we've heard from, local government, key stakeholders, we look forward to working with them in performing that role, and certainly encourage USDA and specifically the Rural Economic Development and the Rural Utility Service to have exercise some oversight as well of the other two partners on this. And with that, thank you for the hearing, and I yield back.
And thank you. And Ranking Member, I want to really sincerely thank you. You and I decided early on at the very beginning that it was our top priority for our rural areas. It is a point of survival for our rural areas, not just in terms of agriculture, but in terms of the survival of many of our small rural towns. We're losing too many of them. I was born in a rural town over in Aner, South Carolina. You cannot get much more rural than there. And this bill means a lot. And I thank you for our joint partnership on this. We couldn't have done it without your help and my help in working together. And I want to thank my committee, because both Democrats and Republicans on this committee, we said finally we are going to get rural broadband in place. And now we're depending upon, as you all are working with, all the different agencies. Now it's collaboration. It is working together. We got $65 billion here. We're ready to go. And we appreciate all of our witnesses coming in and helping us to make sure that we have the FCC, all the USDA, the NTI, all of these other organizations at the federal level. And then they have to work in collaboration with the state level. So we got a monumental task here, but this hearing is getting us off to a good start. So we want to hear from everyone if there are areas where there is not collaboration, if there are things we can do in Congress to make sure we can smooth the paths and make sure everybody's working in good coordination. That's the way we're going to get done. Our rural communities are depending upon us, and we are going to succeed. So once again, thank you. God bless you. And now I think I have to take care of this business. Under the rules of the committee, the record of today's hearing will remain open for 10 calendar days to receive additional material and supplementary written responses from the witnesses to any questions posed by a member. And thank you once again for helping us to get to the floor. They're about to call votes now. Thank you. The hearing of this committee on agriculture is adjourned.